Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 4 of What If Naruto Was in Winx Club. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. Alfie Kitchen. Alfie, Magics. It had been a few days after the Red Foundation exhibition and after the Winx's intrusion into said exhibition where they caused chaos. Needless to say, they were punished heavily for their actions. I hate this. Stella's voice echoes through the kitchen where she and the rest of the Winx are currently located. For their punishment, Farragonda told the girls they'd be on kitchen and cleaning duties for the rest of the semester, and to say Stella was fed up with all this would be a great understatement. I hate doing all these dishes. My delicate hands are starting to get wrinkly. Stella yells as she drops her sponge into the sink and looks at her wet, now wrinkly hands. We know you hate doing this, we've heard you shout it for the last 3 days now, Musa says, not amused by Stella's attitude. Be glad we're not doing cleaning duties for the school, since we all know what happened last time, Tekna says while she was scrubbing a crusty pan. But Stella was about to say when Bloom, who stopped cleaning her pans and turned to Stella. Please Stella, just do this and be grateful Ms. Farragonda didn't expel us when she could have. Let's just finish this and we'll be done for now, Bloom says. Stella looks at him for a bit before she sighs and nods, knowing that Bloom and the others are right. Complaining wasn't going to get their job done faster. Okay, Stella says before she turns back to her sink and resumes cleaning her dishes. The others returned to work and worked in a comfortable silence until Stella had a question in her mind. Has anyone heard from Naruto? She asks, and her question causes everyone to, since it's been some time since I last talked to him. She says, and everyone else looks at each other before. I talked to him last night and he sounded exhausted. Flora says, and everyone turns to her. Naruto. Exhausted? Musa asks with a raised eyebrow as Flora nods. Yes, Flora says. What happened to him to be exhausted? Tekna asks. He didn't say much, only that he wished that he was dead so he wouldn't have to endure this anymore, Flora says, and everyone frowns. Damn, guess his punishment is worse than ours. Bloom says. Do we even want to know just what his punishment is? She says, and Stella shakes her head. I'd rather not know about it. Stella says, and the others agree. They go back to their tasks and continue for a bit before the door to the kitchen opens and Griselda enters to check on their progress. Are you girls finished cleaning the dishes? Griselda asks, and the girls nod. Yes, miss, the girls say while Griselda looks at the clean dishes and sees they're clean. Good. Now hurry on, your classes are about to begin, Griselda says, clapping her hands, and the girls let out a sigh of relief that they were dismissed for now. And I expect you all to be back here after dinner to clean the dishes, she says as the girls clean up their stations. Yes, miss, the girls say before they exit the kitchen as they make their way to their dorm to get ready for the day. I'm not looking forward to later, Musa says, dreading supper time since it was spaghetti night and the dishes were normally messy by the end of supper time. You and me both, Bloom says. As they walk through the halls, she thinks about their other friend. I wonder what Naruto could be doing, she says. Maybe he's at work, Flora says, and that did make sense, that was where he normally was. Maybe, Tekna says. They continue walking in a comfortable silence, and while the girls were right about their friend being in at work, but he wasn't exactly working at the moment. Location: Warlock Parts and Repair Shop, Magic City, Magics. Time: 9:10 a.m., morning. Over at Warlock Parts and Repair Shop, things were. Come on, boy, you can do better than that. For the better word, intense. Hank was shouting at Naruto, who was busy sweating while standing. Now, that would not be that difficult, but he was balancing on a piece of log on one foot, over a pit of burning red coals, while juggling 3 heavy swords with weights on his legs and arms. I'm trying here. It's hard to keep your footing on a freaking small log. Naruto yells, but he flinches, which nearly makes him lose his balance and control over the swords he was juggling when he sees Hank turn to him and send a mean glare. Was that backtalk, boy? Hank says in a cold tone, something Naruto has only heard during their time in training, and he knew to wake the sleeping beast. No, sir. Naruto stutters while Hank huffs. Then keep up your training. I will not be satisfied until I see you on the floor, having completed this task before the afternoon. Hank yells and Naruto nods. Why yes, sir. Naruto shouts as he continues his training. Unaware of the horror that was about to unfold in just a few hours. Location: outskirts of Gardenia, California, United States of America. Earth. Time: 4:10 p.m., afternoon. Timeskip: a few hours later. Just on the outskirts of Gardenia, a portal appears and 4 figures step through it and land on the grassy hill. The portal appears as they look at the gorgeous city. You sure she'll come? One figure asks as another one beside her laughs a little. Of course, sisters. Once we tell her we have her parents as captives, she'll come rushing to save them. This figure says while the first figure just looks at them. And how can we even send her a message about her parents, since we can't exactly go to Alfie given what happened last time? The first figure says while the second one looks at her and smirks before turning to the third figure. Stormy, tell her what you know. The first figure says as the third figure smirks. I saw her call her parents in Magix the other day by complete chance. Bloom always calls them every day after her school day is done. So, all we have to do is go to her parents' house and wait for her to call and we tell her we've got her parents. That could be enough for her to come alone and try and rescue them. Right, Icy? The third figure, Stormy, says as the first figure lets out a dangerous smirk, one that promises pain and misery. Yes, and once she's here, we'll beat her until she's weak and rip the power of the dragon flame out of her fairy body and finally have the power we desire. The first figure, Icy, yells as she begins to laugh manically while her sisters copy her laugh. Yes. Ha 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 ha. Darcy and Stormy yell with their laugh echoing out the empty hill as they were about to begin their plan. Location: courtyard, Alfie Magix. Time: 6 p.m., evening. It was the end of the day and we find our heroines walking across the courtyard on campus with their heads down, all while with looks of exhaustion on their faces. Sigh, what a day, Bloom sighs and the others agree. Yeah, I'm so tired, and we still have dish duty in a bit. I really don't want to do it, Stella mutters. Then what do you want to do, Stella? Musa asks. Sleep. Just sleep, Stella says as the others look at her. For once, I agree with you, Musa says while the others silently agree to that statement. But we still have dish duty. She sighs, her shoulders slouching, dreading the manual chore ahead. Well, we do have an hour before dinner time, so we could go back to our dorm and take a short break before heading down to get ready. Flora suggests and the others thought about the idea before thinking it was good enough, to recharge a bit before heading back to work. That sounds like a good idea, let's do it, Stella says, actually looking forward to this brief rest. But before the group of friends could go to their rooms and rest, Bloom stops. You guys go on up to the dorm. I have to call my parents and check if they're doing okay. Bloom says and the others nod, understanding her completely. Okay, have fun talking to your parents, Tekna says and Bloom smiles as she nods. Will do, see you in a bit, Bloom says as the others leave for their dorm. She then turns around and walks to the phone booths located outside the campus. She enters one of them, puts in the money needed and dials her house number, and waits for the line to pick on the other side, and she doesn't have to wait long as it was picked up. Hey mom, how are you? She greets. Only for nothing to come from the other side of the line, which confused her. Mom, Dad, are you there? Bloom asks. Again nothing comes from the other line and she started to get worried, thinking the line isn't strong enough when someone does eventually speak in the other line, but it is neither Bloom's mom nor Dad. Oh, they're here, Tilda, a voice spoke from the other line, and this confused Bloom, since while she felt she knew the voice from somewhere, she couldn't pinpoint where. Who's this? Where's my parents? Bloom yells as concern fills her mind and heart, thinking something horrible has happened to her parents. Oh Bloom, did you forget who I am after all this time? I mean, we've met a bunch of times and we've been at each other's throats all year. The voice says, and this makes Bloom think. The person on the other side of the line spoke like they knew one another and had been at each other's throats all year, but the only ones who were at her and the others' throats were. Her eyes widen as realization strikes her. I see, Bloom utters, and the person on the other side laughs a little. Ah, you do remember. That's really sweet for you, Icy says as she laughs. Bloom's eyes remain wide for a bit before they darken while her irises start changing from blue color to bright orange while her pupils start to slit. "Where are my parents?" Bloom says. Now, Bloom. "They're here and safe but they really can't do anything at the moment, since they're preoccupied." Icy says as Bloom starts to get angry. "What are they doing?" Bloom growls, her fangs were now showing. "Not much, just sitting around and having a nice time," Icy says while Bloom's anger was increasing. "What did you do to my parents?" Bloom again growls as an aura starts to emit from her body. "Now that would ruin the surprise. But I'll tell you what, you can come and save them. But come alone or else say bye-bye to dear ol' mommy and daddy," Icy says. "We'll be waiting, Bloom, and the clock is ticking. So you better hurry. See you in a bit, Tilda," she says, and the call ends with a click and one continuous beep. But Bloom didn't hear the phone from her ear. She stood in the booth. She was silent while she stood in the booth, her mind racing at the thought of her parents being held captive by Icy and her friends, and her anger flooding her vision as she crushes the phone with her hand while the temperature in the booth starts to climb. And suddenly, she snaps, "Magic winx." She shouts and a bright flash of orange goes off from within the booth before an explosion happens and Bloom shoots out of the now destroyed phone booth as she floats in the sky in her fairy form with an intense flaming aura around her. The explosion and sudden spike in magical presence alerts everyone in Alfie as they go out of their dorm or go into the courtyard to see what is happening. "What was that?" Stella yells. She and the others exit their dorm and were on their balcony to see what is going on when they see Bloom in the sky before she takes off in a certain direction. "Was that Bloom?" she asks, thinking she's seeing things. "Yeah, it was. Where's she going though?" Musa asks as Flora looks at the orange light that was Bloom and sees where she was heading. "To the city," Flora says. "Why?" Tenka asks, wondering what was going on with Bloom to make her go to the city, and she wasn't the only one thinking that. "I have no idea," Stella says as she turns to the others. "Come on, let's go and find her to ask what's wrong," she says, and the others nod to the idea. "Magic winx." The girls yell and transform into their fairy forms. They take off into the skies in pursuit of Bloom to ask what is going on, but due to the delay in transformation and the boost in magic reserves, Bloom is long gone by the time they were in the skies. Seeing this, the girls decide to head to the city in search of their friend while one of them heads in another direction to ask for help. Location: Peters's *1 residence, Gardenia, California, United States of America. Earth. Time: 7:20 p.m., evening. After going through an interdimensional neural teleportation network (INTN) portal from Magix to Gardenia, Bloom arrives in her hometown and she was currently speeding through the chill night toward her parents' house to go and rescue them, all while she's thinking about ways to maim the tricks for this. With little effect and delay, Bloom arrives at her home. She opens the door and enters the living room, hoping to find them there, and she gets her wish as she sees a sight of horror. Her parents were completely encased in ice, with their heads being the only body parts not frozen, but frost was on their faces as they looked pale and weak. "Mom! Dad!" Bloom yells. She rushes to them to check if they are still alive. She checks their pulse, and to her relief, they are, but their pulse were faint. Upon hearing her voice, her dad's eyes slowly open and he looks at her, seeing her expression of concern. "BBB Bloom, is that you?" Bloom's dad utters, his voice weak as he looks at her. "RR run," he utters. "I see you've seen our little welcoming present." A voice spoke beside Bloom as she turned and was hit by a blast of magic which sent her flying back and crashing into the wall. She groans from the pain as she sits up and shakes her head while 4 figures enter the room. They were Icy, Darcy, Stormy and their ogre minion. "Welcome home, Bloom. We've been waiting for you to arrive," Icy says with a smirk. Bloom's eyes glow profoundly orange as the rage she was feeling erupts tenfold. You bitches," Bloom growls as the aura emitting around her starts to intensify to the point where the ground she was sitting start to burn from the heat she was emitting. "I'll fucking kill you," she shouts, her voice sounding like a dragon as she shoots toward the Tricks at a high speed. The Tricks see this and react. "Ogre now," Icy yells, and their ogre roars as he rushes toward Bloom. The two meet in the middle of the room, and Bloom was about to fire one of her magic blasts at the ogre, but he was faster than her as he punches her square in the chest, and his attack sends her flying across the room, crashing through the wall, fly across the street and collide into one of the parked cars on the other side of the street. Bloom slides off the car and lands face first to the ground. She was fortunate the aura she had tanked the majority of the attack, or else she'd be out cold. Bloom starts to regain her composure as the ogre bursts through the hole in the wall and jumps in the air with his arms raised in the air, ready to smash her into the ground. Bloom sees this and reacts. She rolls herself out of the way as the ogre crashes to the spot she was moments ago, creating a crater in the road, while she then performs a series of flips before she leaps and flies into the air just above the ogre. Seeing this as an opportunity to take him out, she conjures her magic to her hands and readies her attack. Dragon shot. Bloom yells, as she fires two massive fireballs at the ogre, with him having zero time to react to the attack and gets hit by the attack, resulting in the ogre being sent flying into the air, and Bloom prepares her next attack. Once she sees the ogre, Flaming Blitz. She yells before she fires a barrage of fire-based magic blasts at the ogre, all landing on his body, resulting in an explosion as the ogre crashes back to the road, lying in a crater burnt and smoking. Seeing her opponent was done, Bloom calls out the ones she wanted to kill. "Come on out here, Trix. It's you I want to face." She yells, and she didn't have to wait long as the Trix flew out of her house and were in the air, facing her. "So, you want to face us? Fine, but be careful what you wish for," Icy says as she and her sisters laugh a bit while Bloom just growls. The four circle in the air, not once taking their eyes off, just waiting for one of them to make the first move. Stormy gets impatient and strikes first in the form of firing a bolt of lightning at Bloom, who just dodges the attack as it hits one of the buildings behind her, and she sends a dragon shot at them, but the witches just dodge the attack too. The four then take to the skies of Gardenia when they engage in aerial combat. Darcy tries to halt Bloom by making a barrier in front of the ferry, but Bloom was quick to stop just before she was about to crash into the barrier. She turns around and fires Flaming Blitz at the Trix, but they teleport about the attack path and reappear behind Bloom as Icy fires a barrage of ice spikes at the Earth Fairy. Bloom turns around just to see the spikes heading to her and braces for the hit, but the spikes just melt before ever hitting her thanks to the aura she had emitting off her. Seeing her magic was useless at this time, Icy tasks Darcy and Stormy to take care of Bloom while she gets the spell ready. Stormy rushes at Bloom and grabs the redhead as she tosses her toward Darcy, who fires a sound-based blast at Bloom with it hitting her, and the attack disorients Bloom and Stormy hits her with an electric attack, shocking the hell out of the poor girl as she falls and lands on a roof of a building below them. Bloom groans and pants from the pain as she gets up and looks up to the sky and sees the Trix were looking down at her. "Had enough, Bloom?" Icy asks, and Bloom growls as she fires a fireball at the trio, but they easily dodge the attack, and Stormy again fires an electric attack at her, and Bloom easily evades the attack, flipping off the roof and flies toward the trio. They re-engage their aerial combat where the four just fire their respective attacks at each other. Most were able to be avoided while some of them had to take the hit. Icy sees Bloom panting and the aura around her was less intense than it was earlier and found this interesting. "Alright, let's leave it at that," Icy says, her words stopping Darcy and Stormy from firing their next attacks. "Come on, we've still got one last card to play," she says. Catching on what Icy was saying, the two nod and stop their attacks, and the three witches disappear in front of Bloom, leaving her there confused. "One last card to play?" Bloom asks, wondering what Icy meant by that, and her eyes widen as she realizes where they could have gone. "Mom, Dad," she yells, fearing for her parents' lives. Bloom bolts back toward their house, hoping she'd get there first before the witches. Unaware that a flash went off where she was and two certain people arrive in Gardenia in search of her. Bloom quickly arrive home, and to her horror, Icy was by her parents, holding two ice daggers by their throats. "Mom, Dad," Bloom shouts, her eyes filled with fear. "Not too quick on the draw, are we, Bloom?" Icy says with a smirk. "Now, Bloom, if you don't want your parents to die, surrender now and don't do anything fun. Or else it's bye-bye to dear mommy and daddy. The choice is yours, Bloom. Choice wisely," she says. To prove her point to Bloom, she pushes the ice daggers a bit into her parents' throats and blood was drawn. Seeing that she couldn't do anything to stop the tricks, not without having her parents seriously hurt or even killed, Bloom clenches her fists and grits her teeth as she transforms back to her civilian self. Wonderful choice, Bloom. Your parents would be proud. Icy says before she looks at Darcy and Stormy, and they nod as Darcy fires a sound blast at Bloom, sending the Earth Fairy soaring across the room before she hits the wall before falling to the ground. Bloom tries to get up, but she's relentlessly shocked by Stormy's attack, causing her to scream out in pain. After a bit, the witch stops and leaves Bloom on the ground, twitching from the electricity coursing through her body. Icy moves from the trapped parents and walks toward Bloom, where she stands above her as Bloom starts getting off from the floor and looks at the tricks with bruises and tears running down her cheeks while blood seeps from the corner of her mouth. Why? Why did this? What are you after to do this? What did I do to deserve this? Bloom yells, desperate to know why would the tricks do this to her. Icy just shakes her head in amusement at Bloom's breakdown. Oh, dear fairy. This is bigger than you could possibly realize. What we're after is something our ancestors were after for centuries. We're after the dragon flame that's in you. Icy says, and Bloom looks at her. What? Bloom says. That's right. The three dark witches are our ancestors, and they were after the power of the great dragon flames for centuries. They understood its tremendous powers and stopped at nothing to have it under their control. They even went as far as to destroy Domino to get it, and they almost succeed. If it wasn't for the former keeper of the dragon flame, the nymph of Domino and magics, Daphne. Icy explains, and Bloom's eyes widen upon hearing that name. Daphne. Bloom mutters. It's been too long since she's last heard or seen of Daphne. Yes, she transferred the dragon flame from her body into yours and sent you far away from your birth planet. Our ancestors were able to get rid of Daphne, but by then, it was too late. You were long gone, and they spent the remainder of their lives searching for you, only for that to be in vain. But we're here, to continue where they left off. To finish what they started. Icy says. Bloom hears this, but she was still thinking about Daphne and what she did. Why would she put such a power into her of all people? Why did she put the dragon flame into me? Why me out of everyone else? Bloom asks, and Icy just shakes her head again. You still don't get it, do you? The great dragon chose to sleep on Domino, and the dragon flame was bestowed on those worthy of it, those in the royal family. Daphne was the crowned princess of Domino, and she transferred the dragon flame into her baby sister. That baby was you, Bloom. You're the last-born daughter of the king and queen of Domino and the last to the throne. You, Bloom, are the long-lost princess of Domino. Icy yells, shocking Bloom to her very core. She was a princess to a kingdom. Icy floats over to Bloom and grabs her chin and forces her to look at her in the eyes. And you're the guardian to the greatest power in the known magics universe, and soon this power shall be ours. She says as she lets go of Bloom and turns to Darcy. She's all yours, sis, she says, and Darcy steps forward with a smirk. And not a moment sooner. Darcy says before she fires a sonic blast at Bloom, causing the girl to scream before she passes out. Icy then used her magic and levitate Bloom off the ground, and then used her ice magic to restrain her. Let's begin the ritual, Icy says, and the two nod as they couldn't wait to do it, as they were closer to the power they desire more than ever. The trio release and drew out their magic as their vacuums appear and began glowing. The trio then began performing a chant as their vacuums began to glow and link to one another with dark magic. The dark magic link hits Bloom, and she suddenly begins screaming. Ah! Bloom cries out as she feels she is being torn apart from within, as if something is being pulled out of her. And something was being ripped in as a ball of glowing orange magic shot out of Bloom's body and flew up to the Trix's vacuum, where it was absorbed into them. Upon this happening, the three witches feel a tremendous boost in their magic reserves and feel this power course through their bodies. Wow, this power, it's incredible. Darcy says. I can feel my power growing stronger. Stormy says. She lifts her hand to her face and sees the lighting surging off from her palms. Icy looks at her hands and sees frost coursing off from her palms and smirks darkly. Finally, after long these years, the power of the great dragon, the dragon flame, is finally in our hands. Icy says. She was feeling lust from this power coursing through her body. It was intoxicating. She felt like this power was a part of her that was missing. She turns to Bloom and knew one thing she had to do. And to make sure that no one will get in our way in control of this power, we have to get rid of the last obstacle in our path. She says. She moves over to Bloom and summons an ice dagger, and places the cold blade to Bloom's throat. She was about to use the blade to end Bloom's life when Solarian flare. A voice yells and a bright flash goes off in the room, forcing the Tricks to close their eyes while Icy drops her dagger. Wind art. Grand push. Another voice yells and the Tricks were pushed away from Bloom by a wind base attack. The Tricks hits the floor and remain there as the flash dissipates as the trio of witches open their eyes and see Stella, in her fairy form, and Naruto with his katana in hand, standing in front of Bloom, protecting her from them. Get away from her, Naruto yells, glaring at them. Well, look who we have here. The princess and the hero. Guess you're here to save the day and stop us. Darcy says as she and Stormy get up and ready themselves for battle. Yeah, let's. Stormy yells as lighting starts surging off her body. Icy gets up and holds her hand out to her sisters, causing them to look at her as she stares at the two winx members. No, we have what we came for. Let's get out of here. Icy says before she snaps her fingers and their knocked out ogre appears beside them on the floor. She snaps her fingers again and they start to vanish, but before they vanish, she looks at Naruto. We'll be back for you next. She says as they vanish, leaving the two in the room with the family. What does she mean by that? Naruto thought, wondering what Icy was talking about. But he couldn't think about that now as he still had to help the Peters family out of their ice prisons. Come on Stella, you get Bloom out of there while I go and get her parents out. He says and Stella nods. Right, Stella says as she gets to work on freeing Bloom. Naruto rushes over to her parents and quickly cuts them out of their ice prison and catches them as they fall. He sets them down on the ground and uses his sword to create a flame and holds it near them to heat them up. Are you alright? Naruto asks, seeing them nod while shivering and also sees their skin regaining its colors. Why yes, we are. Bloom's mom stutters while shivering as she and her husband move closer to the fire. Thank you, she says and Naruto nods. You're welcome, Naruto says. Naruto hears Stella yell out to him and he turns to face the living room. Come here, we have a serious problem here, she yells. Okay, I'm coming, Naruto yells back before he turns back to the parents. I'll be back to check up on you too, just stay near my sword to regain your heat, and don't worry, it won't burn your floor. He says as he places his sword on the ground and lets the two adults warm up to it. He rushes back to the living room and finds Stella holding Bloom near her as the red hair was also shivering and looks very weak. What's up Stella? He asks. I. Bloom stutters, he sees her eyes were widened and she looks extremely pale. Bloom, what's wrong? Naruto asks, concern in his tone and his expression. My magic's gone, Bloom utters after a while and the two blondes look at her in shock. What? Stella asks while Naruto closes his eyes and focuses on his sensing ability. My powers, my magic, it's gone. Bloom utters as Naruto focuses on her and his eyes open wide in shock as he feels nothing from her like he normally should have. Her magic presence, I can't feel it, Naruto mutters in shock as tears begin to form in Bloom's eyes while Stella looks at Bloom with concern in her eyes. Oh, Bloom, Stella says as she hugs Bloom as the red hair begins to sob while Naruto just clenches his fists in anger at this. Feeling the Tricks had something to do with this and he was thinking about ways to kill the Tricks when he senses something. Wait, another magic presence. Naruto thought, wondering what he was sensing. He focuses his senses and feels a massive magical presence somewhere in the city, and it was powerful, like extremely, not like Bloom but still. Who am I sensing? Who has this much presence? He thought as he felt it was someone and the magic presence felt light, meaning that this person was a fairy, but that should be impossible since Bloom was the last known earth fairy, unless. Naruto shakes his head as he hears Bloom's sobs and turns to her. He sees her crying onto Stella's shoulder and feels bad for her. He decides to put that thought back for now as he bends down and hugs the two, feeling for Bloom's loss. Unaware to any of them, this person was sensing them too and was confused about what was happening to them. We once again find ourselves back in the magic's dimension, at Alfie where it was the morning of the next day and we see three people and an animal walking through the emergency underground tunnels. They were Bloom, Stella, Naruto, and Bloom's pet bunny, Kiko. Bloom had bandages on some parts of her body while also having some band-aids on her face. All four had expressions of defeat and depression, with a hint of anger somewhere there. They had been like this since last night back in Gardenia after what happened with the Trix and Bloom with her parents. They spent the night at the Peters' residence to rest and to be sure that the Trix didn't return to finish the job, and they left Earth to return to Alfie to face the music per se. The trio walked down the tunnel until they reached the ladder leading to the Winx's dorm. Being in front of the girls, Naruto was the one who opened the latch to the dorm and entered, with Stella and Bloom following quickly behind. Their entrance alerts Flora, who exits her shared room with a dazed expression, as she looks around for the source of what woke her up. Seeing as the main room was dark, she flicked the lights and saw the trio standing in front of her. "Naruto, Bloom, Stella. You're back," Flora yells as she rushes to the trio and hugs them tightly. The nature fairy breaks the hug and looks at the red hair with an expression of relief. "We were worried about you when you suddenly took off to the city like that," she says with a relieved smile. "Sorry about that," Bloom says while showing a small smile. The commotion in the main area of the dorm causes Musa and Tekna to exit their room and see what is going on before seeing the trio and Flora together. "Guys, you're back," Musa and Tekna yell while they run to them, both looking relieved to see the trio back and safe. "Hi guys, I'm glad to be with you again," Bloom says, her small smile turning to a visible one as she was feeling a bit better to be back with her friends. Tekna notices the bandages and band-aids that were on Bloom and the lack of them on Stella and Naruto as she couldn't help but wonder what had happened. "Bloom, what happened? Why are you covered in those bandages?" Tekna asks, causing Bloom to flinch before she looks down to the ground, Naruto doing the same, but he has an angry expression as he clenches his fists while Stella, who is holding Kiko to her body, just looks at the others with a sad expression before she glances at Bloom. "Girls, something happened to Bloom," Stella says in a seldom tone, something that catches the others off guard since they've never seen Stella like this. What happened?" Musa asks, wanting to know just what happened to her friend for her to be not herself. "That's what I would like to know as well." The 16s and Bunny nearly jump in fright at the sudden appearance of a newcomer as they turn to the door where they hear someone speak and they flinch at seeing Griselda, looking at them with a stern glare. "And just where have you three been?" she asks, narrowing her eyes at the three. Naruto steps forward and he looks at her with a look of disappointment, sadness, and a hint of repressed anger. "Auntie, we need to talk. Something happened to Bloom. Something really bad," Naruto says, prompting the head of discipline to raise her eyebrow, wondering what was going on. Timeskip. 30 minutes later. Location: Headmistress, Office Alfie. In Faragonda's office, Bloom, Naruto, and Griselda were in the room with the headmistress herself and Griselda to hear what was going on. Bloom was sitting in a chair in front of Faragonda's desk while Naruto was leaning against the wall near the bookcase. Griselda poured some tea into a cup for Bloom as she sensed uneasiness from the red hair. She hands the cup to Bloom, who looks at her. "Here, this will calm you down," Griselda says. Bloom looks at the cup in front of her before she lets out a small smile and takes the cup. "Thank you." Bloom thanks the head of discipline, who nods at her, as she takes a sip of the cup. Griselda then walks over to Faragonda and stands next to her while Faragonda looks at Bloom. "All right Bloom, what's going on? What happened yesterday for you to suddenly take off to magics like that?" Faragonda asks. Bloom looks down to her lap as she tries to figure out what to say to her headmistress. "I had to go back to Gardenia, ma'am. The Trix, they had my family hostage," Bloom says, and this causes Faragonda and Griselda to look at her. "What?" Faragonda says, and Bloom continues. "They held my parents captive and said they'd kill them if I didn't come. So, I went back to and faced them, but they overwhelmed me and they nearly killed them. They then trapped me and Bloom was saying but stopped as her words couldn't come out. Faragonda and Griselda look at her with concern and worry, wondering why did Bloom stop speaking. "They did what?" Faragonda asks. But before Bloom could utter a word, Naruto beats her to it. "They took her magic essence," Naruto says, his eyes being shadowed by his bangs. This information makes Faragonda and Griselda look at Naruto with wide eyes. What? Farragonda says, hoping what she just heard was her ears playing tricks on her. They took her magic essence. Griselda asks. She starts looking at Bloom and tries to sense anything from her, and to her shock, she can barely feel any magic presence from her, and the same goes for Farragonda, who was doing the same thing. The two could sense something in Bloom, but it was dormant and they could barely feel it. It would explain how Bloom was able to enter Alphys, since no magical beings could not due to the barrier. Bloom nods, confirming what Naruto had said as she continues to stare at her lap. Yes, they took it, all of it. I'm not a fairy anymore, Bloom says, and tears begin to form in her eyes. Oh, Bloom, Farragonda says, feeling sorry for the poor girl for having to go through something like that, but Bloom wasn't finished. But that's not all they did to me, Bloom says. What else did they do? Griselda asks. Before they took my magic, they told me things about myself, who I am and where I came from. They know who I am, Bloom says, but stops as she remembers the moment the tricks told her the truth. Her eyes continue to well with tears as she grips her jeans tightly before she looks up at the two adults. I'm the last princess of Domino, she says, shocking Griselda while Farragonda just looks at Bloom. Meanwhile, Naruto's mind goes into overdrive upon hearing this, as something has been bothering him for some time, and he closes his eyes in thought. What? You're the last princess of Domino? Griselda asks and Bloom nods. Yes, I'm the last living resident from Domino. And its long-lost princess, that's what Icy told me before they took my powers, Bloom says. Naruto was in deep thought over something before his eyes opened in shock as all the dots in it finally connect. That's it, Naruto shouts, startling the women in the room as they look at him and see he was snapping his fingers as if he had a realization. That's why they were so obsessed with the dragon flame, he says. What are you talking about, Naruto? Griselda asks and Naruto looks at the three. The night we sunk into Cloud Tower in search of Stella's ring, we were in the Trix's dorm looking for it when I came across their desk, filled with various items and information on the Great Dragon, from its earliest records to its final resting to the 12 items forted from its flames. At first, I didn't know what they were doing or why they were so obsessed with the Great Dragon, and I did my research to see if I could find anything for my own, but I didn't. That is until now. I now know what they were after all along, Naruto says as he looks at Bloom. Bloom, I don't know how to tell you more softly, but you're not just the princess of Domino, you're also the keeper of the Great Dragon Flame, he says as Bloom looks at him with a confused yet shocked expression. What? Bloom asks. You are the rightful keeper of the Great Dragon Flame, something that grants the user unimaginable powers and unlocks their full potential. It would explain why you had such a massive amount of magic reserves and why you entered that state whenever you were angry. It's a power so sought out that evil forces like the three ancient evil witches searched for their entire lives and failed to. Naruto was speaking but stopped as his mind went over what he said. The three evil witches of old, the Great Dragon Flame, Domino, the Trix, Bloom. All those had a connection to one another, and he finally sees it as his eyes widen in utter horror from what he concluded. He turns to Bloom and looks at her. Bloom, you don't think that, he says. Bloom looks at him in confusion, wondering what he is on about before her eyes widen in shock, having come to the same conclusion he has. No, it can't be, Bloom utters, her worries and fears increased as she now understands why the Trix were after her. What's wrong? Griselda asks and Naruto looks at her. Granny, Auntie, I think the three witches could be descendants of the three wicked witches of old, and they've finished what their ancestors started, Naruto utters, and Farragonda's and Griselda's eyes widen in shock. Oh no, Griselda utters, she had known only from the stories and tales of how deadly and how powerful the three evil witches were in their prime. If those three were descendants, that would spell disaster. Farragonda scolds her features as she thinks to herself. This is troubling news, Farragonda says, that knowing this new information could only lead to tragedy. This is what I feared would happen, she mutters to herself, but Bloom can hear her and causes her to look at the headmistress. Wait, you knew? Bloom asks, causing everyone else to look at her, wondering what she was on about as Bloom just stares at Farragonda for a bit as she asks again. You knew? Farragonda doesn't look at her and just lowers her head to her desk and nods. Yes, I knew, Farragonda says. How long did you know? Bloom asks, feeling betrayed by Faragonda for keeping this from her while also feeling angry. After you began looking into Daphne the nymph, Faragonda says, and this sets Bloom off. And you didn't think about telling me this sooner. Bloom yells as she shoots up from her chair and slams her hands onto Faragonda's desk before glaring at her. You don't think you could have told me sooner what I had or who I am? She shouts as Faragonda just looks at her before letting out a sigh. Bloom, there are many things I could have done to tell you about who you are and what you possess, but if I did tell you earlier, you wouldn't have been able to process it fully and it would have led to disaster for you and your friends. You must trust me on this, it was for your good. Faragonda says. So you thought it would be okay for me to know from others? It wasn't your decision to make, this is my life we're talking here. Bloom yells, somehow her irises begin to glow orange in anger. She turns around and starts storming toward the door, leaving Faragonda and Griselda to look at her. Bloom, please, calm down and sit. Faragonda tries to plead with Bloom, but the now last princess storms out of the room, leaving the occupants to reel from what happened. Naruto lets out a sigh, gaining the attention of the two professors as he looks at them. I'll go and calm her down. Naruto says. He walks over to the door and opens it to leave, only to stop and turn back to the two. But you seriously need to apologize to her, Granny. Bloom has a right to know who she is and where she comes from. Like how I want to know who I am and where I came from. He says before exiting the room and closing the door behind. Faragonda and Griselda think about what had happened and think about what was said as Griselda looks at her longtime friend. You know he's right. She does have a right to know who she is. Griselda says, and Faragonda couldn't help but let out a sigh as she nods, seeing how her efforts in protecting Bloom had backfired on her. I know, and I will. Faragonda says, knowing she had to apologize to Bloom for her actions. Griselda, on the other hand, was thinking about what the two said about the tricks. If what they said about those three expelled witches being descendants of the three evil witches. What could this mean for magics? Griselda asks. She couldn't help but feel like something was brewing, a storm of chaos and destruction, something that has never been seen before since the final battle against the three evil witches. I don't know. Faragonda says as she stands up from her chair and looks out her window to the mountains, where Cloud Tower was located. But this doesn't sit well for magics, she says, sensing something dark coming to the realm. Location: Winx Dorm, Lounge. Alfie Magics. Time: 8:42 a.m. So, let me get this straight. You went back to Gardenia to go and face the tricks after they held your parents captive and they stole your magic? Tecna asks as Bloom nods. Bloom had returned to their dorm and had explained to the others what had happened to her the previous night, and to say that they were shocked would be an understatement. Yeah, that's the whole thing of it, Bloom says. She was sitting on the couch while hugging her legs, looking exhausted and, for the better word, withdrawn after everything that has happened to her for the past 24 hours. And you're a lost long princess from Domino? Musa asks, saying the one thing that stuck with her from hearing Bloom's story, and once again, Bloom nods her head. Yep, and Miss Faragonda knew all along, Bloom says, frowning a bit as she still feels betrayed by Faragonda for withholding the information from her. Flora, being the closest to Bloom, sees her frown and she moves over to the red hair and pulls her in for a hug. Oh, Bloom, Flora says as she rubs Bloom's head, like how a mother would soothe their child. I'm so sorry that had to happen to you. The nature fairy says, and Bloom just smiles a little before she returns the hug. Thanks, Flora, it means a lot to me. Bloom says. The two stay like this as the others were thinking about the situation. What are you going to do now, Bloom? Musa asks. This question causes Bloom to break the hug as she. It's just, I don't know what to do now. My powers are gone. The dragon flame is gone and in the hands of the tricks, and I can't do anything to stop them from whatever they're planning. I'm a mess, Bloom says as she flops back to the couch and stares at the ceiling in thought of everything she learned and transpired in the past 24 hours. Well, look on the bright side, you're a princess like me, so that's gotta mean something good, right? Stella says, trying to sound upbeat as the others look at her with flat looks. Stella, Tecna says Stella's name as if she was about to scold her for only pointing that out. What? I'm trying to lighten up the mood, Stella says with her hands raised. The others just continue to look at her with a flat expression as Flora turns to Bloom. What are you going to do now, Bloom? Flora asks, and Bloom doesn't say anything at first until she sighs and shakes her head. I have no idea, I just don't know. But I do know this, the entire magic universe is in jeopardy now that the tricks have the dragon flame, and there's nothing I can do. I've lost my powers, I'm not a fairy anymore, I'm just me, Bloom says, sounding and looking crestfallen as the others look at her with saddened expressions, feeling pity for the now known last princess of Domino. Oh, Bloom, the others thought. Do you need anything? I could make you some soothing chamomile tea. Flora offers, but Bloom just shakes her head, declining the offer. Or play you some calming music. Musa suggests, but once again, Bloom shakes her head. No, I just need some time to myself. Bloom says, looking like she did need time to, and the others could see this. Okay, Bloom, we understand. But if you need anything, we're here. Just ask us. Tekna says, and the others nod, agreeing with her. Bloom lets out a small smile, feeling appreciative of her friends and their kindness in her time of need. Thank you, Bloom says before she exits the dorm and walks onto the balcony outside their dorm. She watches the skies for a bit while rethinking everything that had happened. She lost her powers, she was a princess of a long-lost kingdom, she was the holder of an ancient but powerful source of energy that people used to use for evil intentions, and now, it was at the hands of 3 descendants of the 3 evil witches, and who knows what they could do with all that power. She sighs and slouches onto the railing of the balcony. She stays like this for a bit until something hits her on the head, causing her to snap out of her thoughts and look around to see what it is. Huh, she utters while looking around to see what hit her on the head, but sees nothing. What she wasn't seeing was a pair of arms lowering down from above her to her back and quickly grabbing onto her by her shoulders. This causes Bloom to get startled and see a pair of hands holding her. Huh, wah-ah. Before she could say anything further, she suddenly pulled up, prompting her to scream. Her scream alerts everyone else in the dorm as they come out to the balcony to investigate. Bloom, is everything okay? Stella called out to the red-haired but was surprised to see she wasn't there. What the blonde says. Wait, where'd she go? Musa asks. She couldn't have left without us noticing, right? No, she couldn't have. Tekna says, knowing it's impossible to leave the dorm without transforming, and that was out of the question with Bloom. Then where is she? Stella asks. On the roof of Elfie, Bloom was being carried by someone who had their hand on her mouth as they were running over the roof towards a place. It isn't long until they stop and the person who kidnapped Bloom lets go of her and she regains her sense and moves away from her kidnapper, and throws a punch at them, connecting onto the person's chin. Bloom was about to throw another when. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Relax, Bloom, don't do it. Bloom stops and looks at who she just kidnapped her. Naruto. Bloom stutters upon seeing the familiar blonde hair on that whiskered-faced teen. Yeah, it's me, sorry about that, Bloom. I had to get you up here as easily as possible, and that was the only way I saw, so I couldn't let the opportunity pass. Naruto says, but lets out a wince from the pain he was feeling from Bloom's punch. Damn, you got a serious right hook, he says as he rubs his sore chin. Sorry, Bloom stutters, feeling bad for punching him. It's fine, I deserved it for scaring you like that, Naruto says. So, what are you doing? Why did you drag me up here? Well, I was chilling up here, taking in some sunlight when I decided to come and check up on how you were doing, but I couldn't help but hear your conversation. Naruto says as Bloom looks at him with a surprised expression. You heard all of that? Bloom asks and Naruto just nods. Yeah, you guys aren't particularly quiet. Naruto says, while sheepishly rubbing the back of his head. Oh, Bloom says, looking down to the ground, feeling slightly embarrassed that Naruto had heard everything. She notices that the ground was pink and looks awfully like the roof. This causes her to look up and see that they were indeed on the roof, actually near one of the towers. Naruto, why are we on the roof? She asks and the blonde stops rubbing his chin and looks at her. Well, after hearing that felt that I should do something for you. Naruto says and Bloom looks at him confused. Do what exactly? Bloom asks and Naruto just smiles and taps onto the wall, causing a section of the wall to split, revealing a door. This surprises Bloom, but Naruto just turns and walks through the door but stops to look over his shoulder at Bloom. "Follow me," Naruto says, gesturing at her to follow before he walks into the tower. "Okay," Bloom says with a raised eyebrow, curious about what Naruto wants to show her. She follows him up the stairs. They walk up the stairs for a bit until they reach the top of the stairs, where a locked latch is. Naruto opens the latch and goes through it. Before he offers his hand to Bloom, cautiously, Bloom takes his hand and is helped up to the top where he was, and she sees just where they were as her eyes widen in shock. Wow, that was a reaction as she was looking at a glorious view of Magic's, from the mountains in the background to seeing Magic's Cloud Tower and Red Fountain in the distance. She was taken aback by the beauty of this sight. "What is this place?" she asks. "This is one of the places I come to think or get away from everything and just look at the sunset. The view here is something else, especially during sunsets. I felt I should bring you to do something," Naruto says as he walks over to the railing of the top and sits on it. "To do what?" Bloom asks. She walks up and leans on the railing beside Naruto. Naruto doesn't say anything at first and looks at the view for a bit before he sighs and looks at her. "To vent. To let it all out," Naruto says. "So, go ahead. Vent," he says. "Vent about?" Bloom asks. "Everything. Everything that you're bottling in. Let them out, Bloom. Trust me, it'll help," Naruto says and gestures to Bloom to go ahead. Bloom doesn't say anything at first as she was confused as to just what to say. "I don't like how to even know what to think about anything anymore," Bloom says. "Such as?" Naruto asks, motioning Bloom to continue as the red hair takes a deep breath and begins speaking. "It's like, ever since I came to Alfie, everything about my life had been flipped upside down, from how I found out I was adopted to how I'm from a long-lost kingdom, which I'm the princess to, or how I had a very powerful source of energy, so powerful that evil forces came after me, hurt me and those I loved just to get it from me, and now the entire magic universe is in danger because I wasn't strong enough to beat those damn bitches when I had the chance and the power to do so. Or how one of the people I thought I could trust hid important info on my life from me under the guise that it was to protect me. It's my life we're talking about here, shouldn't I have a say in it? Can't I have a say in my fucking life at all, universe? Huh, can't I?" Bloom says but shouts at the end as she pants from how frustrated and exhausted she was feeling from all that. She pants for a bit as Naruto looks at her. "Do you feel better?" Naruto asks, and Bloom just hops onto the railing and sits on it, hugging her legs close while sitting beside Naruto. "A little," Bloom mutters. "So, what are you going to do now? Do you have a plan?" Naruto asks, causing Bloom to sigh and shake her head. "I have no idea. I just don't know what am I going to do about my life, the tricks, or how to get my powers back. I just don't know," Bloom says. She looks at the sky with a defeated expression, knowing she was stuck in a hard place and had no way out. Naruto hums in thought while looking up at the sky before he smiles and looks back at Bloom. "I think I have an idea that could help you," Naruto says. Bloom hears this and can't help but scoff. "Yeah, right," Bloom says with a scowl as she thinks Naruto was only saying this to cheer her up. "No, really I do. Since I understand what you're going through," Naruto says, and Bloom's scowl deepens as this annoys her. "You have no idea what I'm going through, Naruto. No one does," Bloom mutters since she feels no one knows just what she is going through. Naruto looks at Bloom and sees her scowl and he sighs, knowing he has to make his point to her to listen. "I do actually. I went through what you're going through the day after I woke up after crashing here, and I had no memory of who I am," Naruto says, causing Bloom to drop her scowl and turn to him with a raised eyebrow. Insert Ost. Under the Clock Tower by Daniel Pemberton, from Spider-Man, Across the Spider-Verse Ost. "When I first woke up and realized I had no memory of who I am or where I came from, I was fucking scared. I realized I was trapped in a universe where no one is like me. I'm stuck in a place where I have no one to relate to me. I didn't trust Granny, Auntie, or anyone from the staff at all. I kept them from me as much as I could. It got to the point where I escaped Alfie and I ran into the forest to hide away from everyone, but I got lost. I was scared, cold, and wet as I wandered the forests for who knows how long, and then I slipped and nearly fell off a cliff. I grabbed onto the ledge and started crying out for help to anyone who'd listen, but after some time, no one came and my hand was getting tired and it reached the point where I had to let go. I fell off the cliff, accepting my death when someone caught me in the air. I opened my eyes and it was Granny in her fairy form. Naruto says. Boom was shocked at just what happened to him on the day he woke up from losing his memories and how he nearly died if it wasn't for Faragonda saving him, and in her fairy form too. The wind starts blowing by and Naruto starts smiling at the memory of that day. She landed and started to check on me, to see if I was alright, and she said she and the others were worried about me and how they were looking for me for all that time. It was at that point, I realized, I was wrong in not trusting them. They saved my life twice and they did it because they are good people. I broke down crying there and just hugged Granny, thanking her for saving my life. She just hugged back and said it was no problem. After consoling me for what felt like forever, we went back to Alfie and met up with the rest of the staff. They were worried sick about disappearing like that and I apologized for that. After that day, they took me in and started teaching me the basics, and how to defend myself from magic. Over time, I started seeing them as not just my saviors, but as a family. My precious people, the ones I would die for if meant to save their lives. Bloom, I know that your story may not have a happy beginning, but that doesn't make who you are, it's the rest of your story. It's who you choose to be. I choose to be Naruto Uzumaki. A mechanic, a swordsman, a student of Alfie, and a friend and fellow member of the Winx Club. Someone who wants to help those in need, and to get his memories back. He says with a satisfied smile. He turns to Bloom and looks at her. So, who will you choose to be? Someone who's stuck on a past she has no connection to, or the person who's always been the one I like? He asks. This surprises Bloom as she wasn't expecting that question, but it does make her think on Naruto said. Who would she be? She thinks about the question for a bit, trying to see who would she want to be. She looks up to the sky and closes her eyes as she takes in a deep breath. I choose to be Bloom Peterson, and I choose the person I've always been, one who loves her family, her friends and helps those in need. And I want to be someone who wants to know who and where she came from. Bloom says, with determination in her tone, something declaring to the world, and herself that she would remain the same person and know who she is. Naruto looks at her and smiles. That's the Bloom I know. Naruto says, glad to have you back, Bloom. He says, and Bloom looks at him with a small smile. Yeah, it's good to be back to my senses. Thank you, Naruto, for being here and helping me get back to my senses. Bloom says, feeling thankful to the blonde, but he just waves her off. It was no problem, I'm always happy to help my friends in need. Naruto says, with a big bright smile on his face while his eyes are closed as the wind blows by. Bloom looks at him and a blush appears on her cheeks. She feels her heart flatter. She thinks about him and remembers he always puts others above himself, how he's always been there for her and the others and been nice to everyone. She found that admirable and cute. He's someone she wants to be, someone she wants to be with. So, taking in a shakily deep breath, Bloom exhales and decides to speak about her feelings, right here and now. And Naruto, Bloom stutters, calling the blonde as he turns to her. Yeah, what's up? Naruto asks. There's something I want to tell you. Something important. Bloom says, and this catches Naruto's interest. Yeah, what it is? Naruto asks. We're friends, right? Bloom asks. Yeah, of course, we're friends. Why do you ask? Naruto asks with a raised eyebrow. Well, what if we could be more than just friends? Bloom asks, her blush intensifies as she looks away. Naruto too gains a blush on his face while looking at the red hair. Like how? Naruto stutters. Bloom just turns back to Naruto and looks at him in the eyes. The thing is, I lick, Bloom was saying but stopped upon sensing a massive pulse of darkness crossing through Alfie. And it wasn't just her who felt the pulse, everyone else in Alfie, the students of Red Fountain, and those in Magix felt the pulse of darkness hit the realm. And Ost. Did you feel that? Naruto asks and Bloom nods. Yeah, what was that? Bloom asks, wondering what was that pulse. However, before she could continue thinking about the pulse, dark clouds began to form in the clear sky, Blocking all of the sunlight as our duo sat up and saw the clouds gather above Elfie before rain suddenly started pouring down. Rain? The red-haired asks, holding her hand out to the rain and feeling it. The forecast said that there wasn't going to be any rain in 3 weeks, so, what's going on? Naruto says, looking at the clouds in confusion. However, his confusion fades away upon him sensing something in the forest approaching Elfie, fast and in large numbers. Bloom, we need to your dorm. Naruto says, causing Bloom to turn to him. What? Why? Bloom asks. I'm sensing something just in the forest, approaching Elfie. Something big in large numbers, we need to go, now. Naruto says with a serious expression. Bloom sees his expression and realizes he was serious, so she nods and the two leave the tower and start running across the roof while looking down below to see the other students trying to get inside from the rain. What's happening? Bloom asks, wondering what was going on. I don't know, but I'm getting you back to your dorm so you can be safe. Naruto says as they run. Suddenly, Naruto senses the dark pulse from moments ago increase, as if it had an increase in power. What's it that I'm sensing? He asks himself, wondering just what was happening. The two make it back to Winx's dorm as Naruto lowers Bloom down to the balcony while he remains on the roof. Stay here Bloom, you'll be safe. He says and Bloom looks up at him. What are you going to do? Bloom asks as Naruto turns to the forest and frowns. I'm going into the forest to see what's going on. Naruto says. Are you sure a good idea? You have no idea where's out there. Bloom says, with concern in her tone. But the blonde just gives her a bright smile, waving off her concern. Relax Bloomy Bloom, I'll be back before you even know it. Naruto yells before he runs towards the edge of the roof and leaps off it upon reaching it. He drops and lands on the ground before breaking into a sprint toward the wall around Elfie and leaps over it as he runs into the forest. Bloom, meanwhile, just enters her dorm while everyone else is by the window, watching what is going on as they hear the balcony door open and turn to see her entering the dorm. Bloom, where were you? We were planning to look for you when we couldn't find you. Flora says as she and the other look at Bloom with concerned expressions. I needed my alone time and I got some help from someone important and I feel better thanks to them. Bloom says with a blush forming on her face, remembering how Naruto helped her and how she nearly confessed to him. You got better? Musa asks, surprised to hear this, considering that Bloom was out of it not too long ago. The red hair nods. Yep, feel a lot better than I did a few minutes ago. Bloom says. That's good to hear, Flora says. Do you know what's going on, Bloom? Tekna asks and Bloom shakes her head. No, I don't. Naruto said he sensed something in the forest and went to go and investigate what was going on. Bloom says, with a concerned expression. However, what she just said alerts the others as they turn to her slowly. Wait, you were with Naruto? Stella says and Bloom looks at the others and nods. Ah, yes, Bloom says as Flora and Musa's eyebrows twitch a little. And he was helping you? Flora asks, with a strained tone in her voice. Alone? Musa asks, speaking in the same strained tone Flora used. Together. The two say together while giving Bloom a stern glance. Bloom doesn't know what to say really and was feeling a bit unnerved by the glances Flora and Muse are throwing at her. She looks back at the window and takes a step back upon seeing something crawling up onto the glass. Guys, I think we have a bigger problem right now, she says. Everyone sees her take a step back while looking at the window with a frightened look as they look back at the window to see what is going on, only to see a mass army of small creatures that are 8 feet and wavy, almost having the appearance of a scorpion. Stella sees this and instantly gets disgusted at the sight in front of her to the point where she screeches and fires a blast of light magic at the window, destroying it and killing the scorpion-like creatures. She takes a few steps back in fear for her phobia. Sorry, natural reflex. Stella apologizes for destroying the window. However, before anyone can say anything about it, more of the scorpion-like creatures begin to enter their dorm, causing the girls to panic. Flora instantly turned to their table, where Pumpkin Murta was, and could see from the pumpkin's eyes, that she was terrified by this. The nature fairy chanted and cast a protection shield spell onto Murta, to protect her against anything for the next 48 hours. Suddenly, the door opens and the girls turn to see Professor Palladium at the door with an urgent expression. Insert OST. Breakthrough It Special Edit all by Sega, Tomoya Otani featuring Kellen Quint from Sonic Frontiers. Start the OST at 2:37. Everyone, we need to evacuate the building now, we are under attack. Professor Palladium yells. The girls all run out of the dorm and follow Palladium outside of the school and into the courtyard where they see everyone else panicking, trying to get away from the scorpion-like creatures or trying to kill them. They're everywhere. Stella yells. This is a total invasion, we have to fight back. Tekna yells. Musa feels something crawling onto her foot and she looks down to see one of the scorpion-like creatures trying to climb up onto her leg. She lifts her leg, making the scorpion-like creature fall back to the ground before she stomps onto it, killing it. Yeah, let's send the little bastards back where they came from. Musa yells, adding pressure onto her foot to make sure the creature is dead. Right. The other yell, agreeing with Musa, but Bloom gains a depressed expression. But, I can't help you guys fight these things, Bloom says, feeling horrible on not being able to help fight these things. The others see and understand her as Stella walks up to the red hair and places her onto Bloom's shoulder calmly. Don't worry Bloom, we'll take care of them for you too. Stella says, with a smile, assuring her that they had this. Bloom sees this and takes in a deep breath before exhaling and nods. Okay. Go on, fight these things. Good luck girls, and be safe. Bloom says and the other smiles before nods. Thanks, Bloom. You too. Musa says as she steps forward and turns to the others, okay girl, let's send these bugs to their makers. She yells while punching her fist into her hand. The others nod with determined expressions. Magic winx. The four yell and disappear in a bright light as the flash stays for a little before fading away, revealing the four had transformed into their fairy forms. The four fly up into the air to go and battle the scorpion-like creatures as Bloom watches them leave before she looks down at Kiko. Come Kiko, let's get to safety. Bloom says as Kiko nods and they run to somewhere safe. The winx and the other students, who also transformed into their fairy forms, were battling against this army of darkness with their various magic spells. Stella was by the entrance of Elfie with her ring of Solaria in its scepter mode as she spun it in the air, gathering her magic with it for an attack. Sun wave. Stella yells as she spins the scepter and slams it onto the ground, firing a wave of light magic in the form of a wave at the army, destroying a large section of the army. In the air, Musa was gathering magic in her hands for a spell as she saw a bunch of scorpion-like creatures surrounding a bunch of third years. Acting fast, she flies over to the third years and aims just above them. Disco Barrage. Musa yells before she fires her spell just above the third years and her spell forms a disco ball suspended in the air. The disco ball spins as it fires a barrage of light blasts at the scorpion-like creatures, destroying them, and freeing the trapped third years who thanked Musa and transformed into their fairy forms to join in the fight. Flora was also seen flying around in the air, trapping and destroying the scorpion-like creatures when she saw a fellow student was about to get attacked by a monster with an oval face made out of the scorpion-like creature. Its mouth had 8 tentacles as if resembling jellyfish and had the appearance of an android. As the monster lifts its arms to slam down at the student, Flora flies over and conjures up her magic for a spell. Venus Earth Trap. Flora yells, she fires a magical blast onto the ground underneath the monster which results in a Venus flight trap-like plant being summoned and chump the monster in one go before retreating into the earth. Back with Bloom and Kiko, Bloom had grabbed a broom from the nearest closet and broken it to create a makeshift bat. She was using it to swat away the scorpion-like creatures while Kiko was stomping onto the creatures' heads, killing them. Kiko was about to hop in the air to stomp on a few more scorpion-like creatures when he was suddenly grabbed by one of the creatures, causing him to let out a high-pitched squeak, alerting Bloom who turned and saw what was happening. Kiko. Bloom yells as she rushes toward Kiko and leaps in the air to stomp on the creature that is holding her pet. Leave my bunny alone. She yells while swinging her makeshift bat, striking the creatures and freeing Kiko. She bends down and grabs Kiko before she holds him close to her. I may be powerless, but I'm far from useless, she says, happy she saved her companion. But before this can continue, Something emerges on Bloom's left and she turns around to see a giant creature, glancing down at her. "Uh-oh," she utters before she finds herself dodging and running from the creature as it tries to smash her. Meanwhile, Musa was busy blasting some of the scorpion-like and large creatures with sonic-based magic. What she wasn't aware of was that a large creature was forming behind her. Musa notices a shadow casting over her and she turns around to see what was going on to freeze at the sight of the large creature. Her eyes widen as a vision of a Monatro appears in her eyes. Tecna sees Musa frozen in place with the large creature raises its arm, attempting to slam it down at the musical fairy. Acting fast, Tecna flies towards Musa. "Musa!" Tecna yells, flying towards her friend at a high speed while conjuring her magic for a spell. She forms something in her hands and glares at the creature. "Digi-bomb!" The tech fairy yells as she throws a green magic construct in the form of a circuit component at the creature. The component clasps onto the creature's head and beeps for a few moments before exploding, taking the upper half of the creature's body. The lower half of the creature's body falls backward as the scorpion-like creature drops around on the ground and Musa falls to the ground on her knees. Tecna sees this and lands over before landing near Musa and sees her shaking. "You alright, Musa?" The tech-savvy fairy asks while Musa was still shaking. "Why yeah, I'm fine, TT thanks Tecna," Musa stutters, her tone and breathing was uneven as she shakes. "Are you sure you're alright?" Tecna asks, seeing Musa's current condition and was worried. Musa calms her breathing down before turning to Tecna and flashing a grateful smile. "Why yeah, I just need to catch my breath is all," Musa says. This didn't convince Tecna but decided to just let it go, for now. "Okay, I'll leave you to it. Just be more careful, okay?" Tecna says. She turns around and flies away. However, Musa starts breathing unevenly again while she looks at her right hand, to see it is shaking. "What just happened to me? Why did I see that?" Musa asks, as she holds her hands. Meanwhile, with Bloom, she was busy dodging, running away from the creature that was chasing her. She ran for a bit until she was cornered at a dead end. She sees a large shadow cast over her and she slowly turns around to see the large creature looming over her. Instincts take over Bloom as she grabs her make-staff bat and swings it at the creature's head, but the makeshift bat was broken at this action and the creature was unfazed. Bloom sees this and starts backing away until her back hits the wall. "Why you wouldn't harm a defenseless girl, would you?" Bloom asks with a frightened tone as she looks scared. She screams after seeing it raise its hand to attack her but a sword flies through the air and Light Sword Technique, Level 4. A very effective move against those of dark magic. Professor Palladium says while his hands were glowing. He looks at Bloom and smiles. "I'll teach you that next year," he says before turning around and runs to the courtyard to assist in the fight. Bloom looks at the courtyard and sees him and the other professors were fighting the creatures while some were helping some injured students. "The professors," Bloom yells, relieved to see them there, maybe now they have a chance to fight against this invasion. But suddenly, boom! "What the?" Bloom yells, feeling the ground shake while hearing an explosion. She looks up and sees a large cloud of smoke and dust coursing up from a section of the forest. "That's coming from the forest," she says. She was confused by what happened, wondering about what could have caused this until she realized who could have caused the explosion. "Naruto," she utters with concern in her tone and heart. Hoping he was doing all right. Author style. Time travel just 2 minutes ago. With Naruto. Naruto was having his own set of issues. He's sent flying across a section of the forest before slamming right into the side of a tree and sliding down, landing on his butt as he groans from the pain. He groans while standing up, rubbing his head as blood trails down his forehead. "That hurts," Naruto mutters from the pain. He hears some commotion and he looks up and sees a massive amount of creatures, the same ones that were attacking Alfie, approaching him. "Great, more of you," he says before sighing, knowing he was going to be tired and a bit sore after this. He looks around and sees his sword stabbed into the ground in front of him. He looks back at the creatures and spits out from blood from his mouth as he glares at them. "Okay, you want to throw down. Let's get it on cuz I'll take you all on," he yells before charging toward the creatures. He grabs his sword along the way and lifts it, causing the engravings on the blade to glow. He throws his sword at the creatures as the blade spins in the air, soaring. And when it reaches one of the creatures, it slashes it across the chest, making the creature let out a sound of pain while the sword bounces off it and back into the air. Naruto sees his sword spinning in the air and leaps in the air towards it. He grabs it and flips in the air before landing onto the ground as he starts slashing at the creatures, striking and cutting them at their arms, legs, chests and even taking off some heads in the attack. He continues to do this for some bit, taking out some while others were regenerating from the injuries they sustained from the attacks as Naruto sees this and frowns, deciding now to up his game. He lifts it above his head with the wind engraving glowing brightly as wind starts to emit around him. Wind art, Razor's Edge. Naruto yells, slashing his sword at the creatures, with a massive gush of pressurized wind push through the area, causing most of the creatures to fly back. The scorpion-like creatures were thrown back, colliding into boulders and trees, getting destroyed while most of the larger creatures to fly back and crash through some trees but were still intact before they got back up and started advancing towards him. Naruto sees this and grit his teeth in frustration as he lifts his sword to his face before he flicks it with his fingers, causing the black steel to shake and vibrate while another engraving began to glow. Earth Art, Spike Game. Naruto yells as he downs his sword down to the ground, hitting it, and this makes the earth in the area shake before cracking and becoming uprooted as spikes form and speed towards the creatures, with the spikes impaling most of them while the earth continues to uproots, forming cracks in the earth which the remaining creatures fall into. Seeing this, Naruto decides to end this as he lifts his blade above his head with one more engraving on the steel beginning to glow as sparks and steam emit from it before a flame sparks to life on it. Flame Art, Dragon's Pierce. He yells, swinging the sword down, and a massive arc made from red-orange flames shoot out from the swing, traveling towards the remaining creature as the arc collides with them, resulting in them getting vaporized by the flames, and a massive explosion kicks off, causing a massive cloud of dust and smoke course up as the trees and plant life in the area of the explosion begin to burn. Naruto let out a sigh of exhaustion as he pants from all that action, but was relieved that it was over. He turned around and was about to go to another section when he heard a snap behind him. He turned around to see what was happening, only to be shocked to see a large new amount of scorpion-like and large creature emerge from deep within the forest. "You've got to be kidding me, these guys seriously can't be this stubborn," Naruto utters, in disbelief that more enemies were coming. He sighs and turns back to face them again. He then looks at his sword and his eyes widen at something he is seeing. "Great, I'm running out of juice here," he says, seeing the engravings blinking, indicating that it was running out of its stored magical reserves. He looks at it closely and sees the blinking wasn't dimmed, meaning he had enough left in the tank. "I think I have enough of one massive combo, guess now's a good time to try it out," he says as he looks back at the creatures and notices all of them are together. He knows he had one shot at this and he needs to take it now. So, he closes his eyes and concentrates. Flame Art, Naruto says as the fire engraving begins to glow, resulting in his sword to spark into flames. Wind Art, he says, and the wind begins to pick up around him and his sword as the dried leaves begin to burn away. And Earth Art, he says, with his sword beginning to vibrate. He opens his eyes and looks at the creatures. He starts spinning his sword in place, feeling the intense heat coming from it while hearing the metal vibrate, waiting for him to strike, but he just spins it. He stops spinning his katana, to where he was holding it in a reverse grip, pointing down to the ground. Elemental Art Combo, Lava Eruption. He yells before he stabs his katana down into the earth. At first, nothing seemed to happen. That was before the earth once again got uproots, but unlike last time, it was heated to the point that it was molten magma, and the magma was traveling toward the creatures at a high speed. The magma collides with the creatures, causing them to scream in pain as they are being burned alive by the molten rocks. Naruto watches this, knowing that there is no way these creatures could escape from this, and it is only a matter of time until they die from their burns. "That should do it," Naruto says, letting out a sigh while dropping to his knees, from the exhaustion he was feeling. "Man, Frank was right, keeping your concentration on your own swordman's style while fighting is hard," he says, chuckling a little. Naruto then looks around and sees the burning section of the forest thanks to his dragon pierce in the magma. "Floras kill me if I left the place like this," he says. Naruto then looks at his katana to see how much magic reserves it has left and looks at the blinking engravings. Enough of two more, he says as he starts up and lifts the sword in front of him. He closes his eyes as one of the engravings starts to emit a blue glow. The raindrops around him freeze in the air before starting to move toward him in a flowing motion before it moves around him in a circle. Naruto then starts spinning his sword for a bit with both hands as the water around moves and expands along with his spins before he stops, once again holding it in a reverse grip, pointing down to the ground. Water art, whirlpool flow, he says as he lowers the sword to the ground and taps the tip of the blade onto the earth. This causes the collected water around him to expand and shoot out in a whirlpool motion, hitting all the burning trees and molten rocks around as stream courses off the burnt bark and cooled magma. Naruto looks around and nods to himself at a job well done. That should do it. Now, to get back to the fight, he says before leaping off to go and fight any more creatures still lingering in the forest. The battle continues not just at Elfi, but also at Red Fountain where the students were batting against the creatures with their weapons. Over in Faragonda's office, she was speaking to Saladin over holo call, discussing the current situation at hand. This is bad, Saladin. Elfi is under attack by these creatures, and they're injuring the students. Faragonda says as Saladin on the holo call nods. Yes, the situation here at Red Fountain is the same if not worse. They've already caused severe damage to the building and from the reports I've been gathering, the entire Magic's dimension is in the same trouble we are facing. Saladin says. This troubles Faragonda as she frowns. This is troubling news, Faragonda says, with her hands near her face. Just then, Griselda storms into the room with a frantic expression. They've swarmed the East Wing, and are heading to our labs. Griselda yells. This causes Faragonda to shoot up from her seat with a serious expression. I must go, Saladin, I have to go and assist my girls. Faragonda says and Saladin nods since he understands. So must I. I need to go and help my boys. Saladin says, cutting the call as Faragonda looks at Griselda. Come, Griselda, let's go and help our students. Faragonda shouts as Griselda nods and the two rush out of the office to assist in the fight. The fighting continued for nearly 2 hours as we cut over to Cloud Tower which had the same monsters that were attacking Magix, Elfi, and Red Foundation but for some unknown reason, these creatures weren't attacking the school. We move over to the top of the school and we see Icy, Darcy, and Stormy, all looking over the chaos that was happening over Magix with glee expressions. Look at all those fairies, specialists, and all those citizens in the city, running around like headless chickens. Darcy says, with a big grin on her face. Such destruction, such chaos. Oh, how I love it. Stormy says, she too had a massive grin on her face as she was losing all this chaos that was happening. Icy nods, agreeing with her sisters. Yes, sisters. Now is the time we fulfill our ancestors' ambitions and take over. Icy says as her eyes glow, allowing the power of the dragon flame they stole from Bloom. She uses the power on the creatures, causing them around Magix to stop before turning around and begin walking, fly to Cloud Tower, causing much confusion from those in Elfi and Red Fountain. Let's call back the Army of Decay, it's time for Magix to hear our demands. She says, getting ready to prepare the demands they'll make to the higher powers of the Magix dimension. It looks like things for our heroes are about to get much more difficult. Faragonda's office Elfi, Magix. A few hours have passed since the unexpected attack on Magix occurred from the hands of Icy, Darcy, and Stormy. The Trix and Magix were still reeling in the effects of the attack. The city sustained heavy damage and several casualties from the Army of Decay as there was no defense in the city for such a situation. Red Fountain suffered damage to its building, but the students and teachers fought hard against the army. Elfi was the only one who sustained less damage due to the impressive teamwork the students and teachers showcased against the Army of Decay. The only part of Elfi that sustained damage was a section of the forest surrounding the school due to one of Naruto's attacks. Cloud Tower's status was yet unknown due to the lack of communication from the head witch. Currently, we find ourselves in Faragonda's office where the headmistress herself was sitting by her desk, looking at something. But she wasn't the only one in the room. Griselda was also there but also was Saladin. They were watching a recording from Icy, who sent it out to all the higher-ups in Magix, showing who was responsible for this attack and why. Your pathetic magic schools will cease to exist. We have supreme power, the likes you've never seen, and we will stop at nothing to obtain full control over the magic dimension. The attack that just happened was only a glimpse of our strength. If you don't want to perish by our hand, you have 12 hours to comply with our demands or face total annihilation. Resistance is futile, the projection of Icy says, her eyes eerily glowing as she seemingly glares at them. The recording ends and everything in the office goes silent as the occupants process the demands of the tricks. They're completely insane, Farragonda says after a while as Saladin nods in agreement. Yes, those three witches are exactly like their ancestors. Saladin says, remembering how deranged the three evil witches were back in his young years. Farragonda turns to Saladin. Except that their ancestors could never obtain the power of the great dragon flame, something they have now at their disposal. Farragonda says with a frown. Her words were heavy due to them being true. With the dragon flame, the tricks have ascended levels of power the likes of magics have never seen. And if the previous battle said anything, this was only the beginning. Saladin nods, his thoughts on the same process as he looks at the headmistress of Alfie. We'll have to work together if we have any hope of defeating those three. Saladin says, realizing if they had any chance of saving magics, they'd need to work together. Farragonda nods. Agreed, Farragonda says. I'll head back to Red Fountain and organize a defense strategy. We have to act quickly. Every second we wait, the stronger those three become. Saladin says. Farragonda again nods as Saladin lifts his staff and chants a spell and he starts to emit a bright glow before disappearing. Agreed. Good luck Saladin, Farragonda says just as Saladin had disappeared. She then turns to Griselda. Has any word come from Cloud Tower? She asks and her lifelong friend, Vice Headmistress shakes her head. No, still no message has come from them. Griselda says and this makes Farragonda frown. I see, Farragonda says, placing her hands near her mouth as she thinks about the lack of communication from Cloud Tower. She hopes everything was alright with Griffin and her students with what has been going on. What will we do in the meantime? Griselda asks. Farragonda doesn't say anything but just closes her eyes as she thinks about their next move. They couldn't sit around, waiting for the next wave to come, they had to do something about the tricks and their power. She opens her eyes, an idea comes to mind. We'll do a plan for our own, Farragonda says as she turns to Griselda. Call Bloom, Flora, Musa, Stella, Tekna, and Naruto to my office. It's time we devise a plan, she says with a serious expression and Griselda nods before she turns and leaves the office to find the six mentioned. Time skip. 10 minutes later. 10 minutes passed and the female members of the Winx Club were in the office with Farragonda and Griselda. The only male member of the club wasn't there as Griselda couldn't find him, but they'll look for him after this meeting. Thank you for coming girls at such short notice, Farragonda says as she looks at the 5 girls present. We are in a dire situation, she says. What's wrong headmistress? Tekna asks as Farragonda sighs. The 3 witches, the ones who've been terrorizing against you all for most of the year, are planning an attack against us, Farragonda says, with a frown. Hearing this, the girls were surprised as they finally found out what, or rather who had been responsible for all this. They're doing what their ancestors did. Back then, the 3 evil witches seriously threatened Magix's balance of power in search of the great dragon flames. Fortunately, they never found it and died before they could get close to it. But now, their descendants have taken their ambitions and this time around, have obtained the dragon flame, granting them unimaginable power. She says as the girls process this information. Now fully understand why they were after the dragon flame for so long. Farragonda looks at Bloom with a serious expression. Bloom, at this point, we can hold out for so long but to ensure that we have a chance in defeating these witches, we need you to go back to Domino. She says, catching the girl by surprise. To Domino. But why? Bloom asks, confused about the request. Because, according to legend, Domino was the final resting place of the great dragon and it was the 3 evil witches who destroyed your home, your kingdom. And Icy, Darcy, and Stormy will soon follow in their footsteps, but this time, they'll destroy everything. Farragonda says. She walks in front of the girls and conjures a magical construct in the air as it displays an image of Domino, a currently frozen wasteland. I'm thinking, perhaps, somewhere in the reminiscences of the royal palace, you might be able to find a clue. A shred of evidence, something that can help you reclaim what was stolen from you, the dragon flame. Bloom, you're our only hope in winning this battle. Will you do this, Bloom? The headmistress asks, looking at Bloom. Hearing this, Bloom fidgets in place nervously as she looks down at her feet. But, I don't know, I mean, all of this is my fault. The tricks tricked me, stole my power, and now are using it to wreak havoc on magics. I'm powerless, no longer a fairy, just me. I don't think I can do this. Bloom says, sounding and looking unsure of herself. Her confidence had seriously been shot after the trick stole her powers and how she couldn't help during the first initial attack on Megex. She could barely defend herself before she needed help. She felt that she might mess this up and let everyone down. Seeing Bloom hesitate, the others look at one another for a bit before turning back to Bloom. Then let us come with you, Bloom. Musa says. This catches Bloom's attention as she looks at Musa and the others in surprise and sees them smiling at her. Yes, we'll gladly come along with you. Flora says, flashing a gentle smile as Stella looks at her. That way, you'll have backup whenever something might happen. Really? Bloom asks, not believing they were willing to come along on this mission with her, but she sees the others just go over to her and wrap her into a group hug. Yes, we're not just roommates, and we're more than just friends. We're the Winx Club. We'll always stick together, no matter what comes our way. Tekna says, with a smile. Hearing this, Bloom couldn't help but get emotional as tears began to well in her eyes as she wrapped her arms around the girls, returning the hug. Thanks, girls. Bloom says. I hate to be that person and ruin this moment, but just how are we supposed to get to Domino? It's on the other side of the dimension and there isn't any INTN that will take us directly to Domino. It'll take a day to get there even if we use the fastest ship available. Tekna explains, knowing well as she had her digipad out and looked up the last known location Domino was recorded. However, someone knew about this beforehand and grins as they heard Tekna. I've got the solution to that issue, my tech-savvy friend. The occupants in the room hear someone speak and they turn to the source. They see Faragonda's bookshelf open up and Naruto walks through it, in his mechanic outfit and was covered in grease stains and dirt as he wipes his hands with a cloth. Sorry I'm late, I had to recalibrate some of the circuits so they don't blow up during the trans-dimensional warp. He says, as he finishes wiping his hands and puts the cloth in his pocket. Naruto, where were you? And why are you covered in grease and dirt? Bloom asks, seeing the state their friend was in. I was busy rigging something for us. Naruto says, gaining the attention of the girls while Faragonda and Griselda look at him with knowing looks. Rigging what up? Tekna asks as Naruto looks at her and smiles. A way to get us to Domino fast. Naruto says before he turns to the other. Girls, go pack some food and some emergency supplies. After that, meet me at the simulation room in 20 minutes. We don't have time to waste. He says as he turns around and was about to process leaving the room through the bookshelf. Stella stops him when she speaks. Wait. What do you mean pack supplies and warm PJs? Stella asks, confused by what was Naruto talking about. Naruto looks back at her and the others. Like I said, a way for us to get to Domino fast. Look, I'll explain when we get there. Naruto says. He looks back at the bookshelf and pulls a book, causing the bookshelf to split open, revealing the tunnel, and walks through it before he turns back around at the occupants in the room and looks at them. I'll see you all there. That's all he says before the bookshelf closes and everyone is left in the room to process the information passed from him to them. Well, you heard him, girls. Go to your dorms and pack the necessary gear. We'll see you at the simulation room. Faragonda says. Hearing this, the girls start leaving the room to head back to their dorms to get ready. Back in the office, Griselda looks at her lifelong friend. Do you think they'll be able to get to the castle on Domino, let alone find a clue there? Griselda says, and at first, Faragonda does not say anything for a bit before she sighs and looks at her oldest friend. Let's have faith in them, Griselda, for as of this moment, the fate of Magix lies in their hands. Faragonda says, letting the words sink in, knowing that the fate of Magix did lay in the hands of 6 teenagers. Location: Simulation Room, Alfie, Magix. Timeskip: 20 minutes later. After about 20 minutes, we find ourselves in Alphei's simulation room, where the winx were inside the simulation chamber while Faragonda, Griselda, and Palladium, who was busy at the controls. The winx had backpacks strapped to their backs. Palladium was adjusting a few controls and buttons on the machine's control panel before he looked at the teens in the chamber. "Alright students, are you all ready to go?" Palladium asks as Bloom looks around the chamber. "Sorry to ask this now, but why are we here, Professor?" Bloom asks the question that was on the minds of those unaware of what was happening while Naruto just grins. "Naruto and I were busy modifying the simulation systems, and in a few moments, those modifications will cause the simulator to create a multi-dimensional pathway, one that will take you all directly to Domino." Palladium explains as everyone now realizes why Naruto was late to the meeting and why he was covered in grease and dirt. The professor then presses a button and suddenly, 6 balls of light appear in the chamber and float to the teens before stopping just above their heads. The teens look at the balls as the balls of light release a pulse of magical energy which washes over the teens' bodies as their outfits change into new ones. The girls all now wore a dark blue coat with a hood and white fur around the hood, dark blue pants, and knee-high black boots. They also had on dark blue gloves and a pair of orange-lensed goggles. Naruto's outfit was different than the girls'. His outfit consisted of a black thick winter coat with orange lines on the sleeves and chest which also had a hood attached, orange pants, and black climbing boots which had retractable spikes on the soles. He also had a pair of black gloves and a pair of black lensed goggles as well. There was something else strapped to him on his back. It was a scabbard where his sword was sheathed. Seeing that the teens were ready, Palladium looked over the controls for one more time before seeing everything was ready as he looked back at the teens. "Now I do have to say this. Everything you will face there is real, it's not a simulation. So just relax, clear your minds and stay together, because we don't know what would happen if you got separated from each other. Understand?" Palladium says and the teens all nod, understanding his words. "Yes, sir," the teens say. Seeing them understanding, Palladium nods and looks at Faragonda, waiting for her order to get things started, and she nods. He then goes back to the controls and flicks some buttons and inside the chamber begins to emit a light. Intonating multi-dimensional trans-rap sequence in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Palladium counts down before his finger hovers over a red button. "Ignition," he says as he presses the button and the chamber lights up in a bright flash which consumes the entire chamber before it fades and the teens vanishes. Palladium checks over the control panels to see if everything has gone accordingly, and to his relief, he sees all systems were green. The multi-dimensional pathway was a success. They're on their way to Domino. He says. Faragonda and Griselda let out sighs of relief hearing this. "It's all up to them now," Griselda says as Faragonda nods. "Agreed," Faragonda says. Palladium turns to them and looks at them. "I hope you have a way to bring them back," Palladium says, causing the two to look at him with confusion. "Why?" Faragonda asks. "Because, all the modifications Naruto and I did to the simulator were enough to create a one-way multi-dimensional pathway, but not a way back. At the exact moment they step foot onto Domino, they'll be stranded there with no way back," Palladium explains. Hearing this, Faragonda and Griselda were shocked to learn that their students were now stranded on a deserted planet. "I see," Faragonda says after a while as she closes her eyes and thinks of something for a bit before she opens them and looks at Palladium and Griselda. "I'll go and arrange a pickup for our students. Let's just hope they'll find an answer before then," she says and turns to leave the room to go and do the arrangements with Griselda following her not too soon after. Palladium looks back at the control panel and sees that the multi-dimensional pathway had faded away, indicating that the teens had made it to Domino safe and sound. "Good luck, children, you'll need it," Palladium says, knowing that the journey will be rough. With the winx. Location: Domino, Magix. Time: 7:40 p.m. We shift our focus onto the winx as we see they were on the surface of a frozen terrain. "Looks like we made it," Naruto says as he bends down and picks up some snow from the floor, feeling it in his hand and knowing this was the real deal. "So, this is Domino," Bloom utters as she looks around the frozen surroundings, seeing what was her true home, her kingdom. Everything's covered in ice and snow. she says, looking at the frozen terrain with a mixed sense of familiarity and sadness. I'll say, it's freezing, Stella says, holding herself as she feels the freezing wind blow into her face. So, where should we go? Flora asks. Insert music, Pockets Full of Stars by 9 Black Alps. I say, we head that way, over by those mountains. Tekna says as she has a digital map displayed on a wristband. She was looking at the map and saw just where they were, not too far from the castle but still far enough it'd take a while to get there. She looks up to the sky and sees how dark it was getting. Since we don't have much time on our hands, we've got to hurry before it gets dark. I don't want to be out here in the open for whatever is out there when it does get dark. She says. Everyone else looks at the sky and sees how dark it was getting and realizes that they are low on time. Good idea, the others say before they set off, in search of the royal castle. The 16 start walking in a direction toward the mountains as they battle through the extreme cold. They walked over various slopes and hills and at one point, they walked over an ice bridge that was seemingly suspended over a deep canyon. While walking on the ice bridge, Bloom slipped over some ice and started to lose her footing before she nearly went over the edge of the bridge, but fortunately, Musa was the closest one to her and manages to grab her at the last second and pulls Bloom back to safety, much to the relief and thanks for Bloom. After about 2 hours of walking, the group continued walking through the snow, as the cold and its effects were starting to get to some of them. Fade music at 1:25. I don't know how much longer I can keep going, I feel like I'll freeze over at any moment, Flora mutters, shivering a little bit as she was holding herself since her body isn't used to the cold climate. Let's keep going a bit further, just until we get a little closer to the castle, then we'll rest. Naruto says. How could things get any worse, Stella says, also holding herself. As if the universe was listening to her, heavy winds began to blow, causing everyone to use their arms as shields. Great, me and my big mouth, the Solarian princess mutters as a sweat drop appears. Nice going, Stella, Tekna says, now holding her arms up to her face to block the freezing winds. Sorry, Stella says. Suddenly, Flora holds her head, as if a headache was coming and attracts everyone's attention. Wait, something's not right here, Flora mutters. What's wrong, Flora? Is the cold getting to you? Bloom asks and the fairy of nature shakes her head. No, it's not the cold, I feel a shift with Mother Nature. She's not happy about something here and it's something bad, Flora says, still holding her head. Musa frowns as she listens to the wind. Yeah, the wind's not sounding right, it's like it's filled with anger. Musa says. Suddenly, everyone started feeling the ground begin to shake and they looked around to see what was happening and to their shock and horror, they saw a large cloud of ice and snow heading toward them. Oh no, a blizzard. Bloom yells, seeing the massive cloud heading towards them. The snow from the blizzard starts to hit them as the group just fights to stay standing against it, but they knew if they didn't do anything to get away from the blizzard, they were screwed. Transforming and flying through it was a no-go since Bloom couldn't transform and she and Naruto couldn't fly. Plus even if the others were to carry them while flying through the blizzard, their wings would be damaged or worse, break. 1. What are we going to do? Musa yells, seeing the blizzard was getting close. Naruto looks around and sees a cave nearby, realizing that the cave could be their salvation. Quick, to that cave, we can stay in there and wait out the blizzard. Let's go before things get worse. Naruto yells, alerting the girls as they turn back to him and see the mentioned cave. Looking back at the approaching blizzard, the girls realized that the cave was their safe option. So, the group started running towards the cave as the blizzard cloud was barreling behind them. Seeing the cloud was catching up with them, the teens picked up their pace and reached the cave just as the blizzard hit the front of it. Inside the cave, the teens were panting from all the running as they felt the strong winds enter the cave. Looking at the entrance of the cave, they could see the snow and winds of the blizzard start to form at the entrance. Quick, let's put a barrier spell so that the blizzard won't get into the cave. Stella yells as the other girls nod. Right, the other girls minus Bloom say as they look at the entrance of the cave and point their hands at it. Magic starts to gather around their palms as they aim and, barrier. They shout as they fire a ball of concentrated magic at the entrance as a glowing barrier forms at it and it starts blocking out the ice, snow, and wind from the blizzard. Seeing their barrier blocking out the blizzard, the winx let out a sigh of relief. There, that'll hold for several hours or so. Meaning we're safe, Stella says, looking at the glowing barrier while Tecna sighs. But that also means we're stuck in here until the blizzard passes. Tecna says, knowing they were stuck. That doesn't matter, as long we're safe. Flora says, relief in her tone. So, what should we do while we wait for the blizzard to stop? Bloom asks. Naruto looks around the cave and sees it was big enough for them to rest, and maybe set up camp. Guess we can set up camp here in the cave and wait it out. Naruto says, and the others agree, seeing there was nothing else they could do while stuck in the cave. So, what should we do now? Stella asks as Naruto looks and sighs. Like I said, we wait out the storm and rest. Naruto says before he looks around the cave and sees a large opening where they can rest. Let's start up a fire in our tents over at that spot, there's plenty of space for all of us. He says, pointing at the spot. The others look at the spot. Nodding at the suggestion, the winx move to where they take off their backpacks and pull out their supplies as they start setting up their tents. Location: Saladin's office, Red Fountain, Magix. Time: 10:10 p.m. Night. Meanwhile, back in Magix. Back in Magix, things were relatively the same. The gloomy atmosphere caused by the Trick's attack still loomed over Magix. However, our attention is brought to Red Fountain, where we see Saladin in his office, standing in front of a few surprising guests. I sincerely hope your presence here isn't another trick by those witches. Saladin says, glaring at an orc. To be precise, this orc happened to be the same orc Bloom, Stella, and Naruto faced on the first day they met. His name was Canute. No, it isn't. We came here alone seeking help. Canute says. And you heard that right, he wasn't alone. He had a small purple duckling sitting on his shoulder. This was the same duckling we saw on the night of the attack. Canute holds his hands together at Saladin in a pleading gesture. Can you help us, please? The orc asks, expressing fear. Saladin just looks at the orc for a bit, trying to see if he was deceiving him, but after seeing how frightened he and the duckling are, he realizes that they might be telling the truth. And why should I trust you? If I remember correctly from the reports, you've been the Trix's most loyal minion. Saladin says, knowing Canute's history with the Trix. I was, but now, they're dangerous. Deadlier than before. They've gone completely drunk from the power they stole and it's making them scary. Canute says. I see, Saladin says, realizing just how dangerous the Trix have become. As he thinks about this, a flash of light goes off behind the orc, alerting the occupants in the room as they turn around and see the Trix standing in the room as magical projections. I'm surprised, Saladin, I didn't you as a person who'd be speaking to traitors. Icy's magical projection says, sneering the last word as she shoots a dark glare at Canute and the duckling. You two will regret betraying us. I promise you that. Darcy's magical projection says, her eyes portraying dark thoughts on what she would do to the two once they got their hands on them. You think you'll be able to stop us, but you won't, for we are invincible. Stormy's magical projection yells with a manic smirk as all three begin laughing, as if what she said was the absolute truth. Saladin grits his teeth after hearing that, as it frustrates him. He grabs his staff tightly before he aims it at them. You damn witches, you'll get what's coming to you. Saladin yells before he releases a massive pulse of magic at the projections, causing them to dissipate from the room, leaving Saladin, Canute, and the duckling alone in it. After a bit of silence, Saladin turns to Canute with a stern glance as he just asks him one question. Tell me everything you know. Location: in the cave, Domino. Time: 8:02 a.m. Date: the 2nd of December, Sunday. Back with the winx. Meanwhile, back on Domino, morning rose on the frozen wasteland as the winx were sleeping in their tents, the girls in their own while Naruto slept in his own while there was a campfire in between the two tents. The blonde unzips his tent from the inside and crawls out of it as he stretches his limbs. He looks over at the barrier and sees it was still active. Naruto moves towards the girls' tent as he taps on the tent. Hey girls, time to get up. Naruto says, yawning as he walks away from the tent and heads over to the campfire. The girls' tent unzips and Musa is the first to emerge from within it as she yawns while looking at Naruto. Morning, Naruto. Musa greets the blonde who waves at her. Morning, Musa. How'd you sleep? Naruto asks. Musa yawns while she crawls out of the tent, having slept in her winter gear as she sees Naruto summoning his katana and crouching down to the campfire. Cold and less comfortable than back at Elfi but manageable. You? Musa asks. Naruto uses a bit of his flame art to ignite the campfire as he lets the relit flame spark back to life before he stands up. Not too bad, I've slept in much worse situations before. Naruto says as he had fallen asleep in unusual spots in his cave, from either pulling all-nighters from working on engines, Akira, studying, or making ruins. I see. Musa says as she heads over to the fire to help Naruto with it. While they were getting the fire going, someone peeks their head from the girl's tent and sees the two near the fire. Morning Musa, Naruto. Naruto and Musa turn to the voice and see Flora peeking her head out, looking at them with a smile. Morning, Flora. The two greet the nature fairy. You guys getting the fire started? Flora asks and they nod as she crawls out of the tent and stands. Need any help? She asks. Naruto and Musa look at the fire and see it was starting to heat up as they shake their heads. Nah, we got this, but we could use some help getting the food ready to cook. Could you lend a hand for that? Musa asks and Flora gently smiles as she nods. Sure, no problem. Flora says as she goes back into their tents and pulls out some of their backpacks before she looks into them and takes out various food from them. She then sets the backpacks aside and goes over to the fire so they can cook breakfast. While they were cooking, Tenka woke up and crawled out of the tent, greeting the trio with the three greeting back as the tech-savvy fairy sat by the fire for warmth. While this was happening, Bloom had awoken and was busy trying to wake Stella and get her out of the tent. Come on, Stella. Time to get up, Bloom says as she tries to get Stella out of her sleeping bag while the Solarian princess groans, not wanting to get up. No, I don't wanna, 5 more minutes. A princess needs her beauty sleep before classes. Stella groans in her sleep as she thinks she was still back at Elfi as she tries to pull her sleeping bag back up to her so she can continue sleeping. Bloom looks at her with a deadpan expression as a sweat drop forms at the side of her head. Stella, we're not at Elfi, we're on Domino. Bloom says in a deadpan tone. Hearing that, Stella opened her eyes and looked around to see that they were still in the ice cave and not her room as she had thought. Oh, right, I forgot. Stella murmured softly but it was loud enough for everyone to hear and they couldn't help but laugh. Eventually, Stella wakes up and the teens all sit by the campfire while having some breakfast. Afterward, they packed their tents and made their way to the cave's entrance where the girls' barrier was still activated. Seeing this, the girls cancel the barrier, letting it drop as they see the barrier has made a large and dense wall of snow at the entrance, blocking their only way out of the cave. Feels like the blizzard stopped. Flora says, using her nature sense ability to sense there was no disturbance outside. Musa walks over to the wall of snow and taps it with her hand, feeling how stiff it was as no snow was crumbling from it. Yeah, but we're trapped inside this cave by a wall of ice and snow. Musa says, making the others frown at the thought of being trapped. Meanwhile, Naruto snorts in amusement. Please, this is nothing. Step aside, Naruto says as he draws his sword, and the girls away from him. Staring at the wall in front of him, Naruto lifts his sword to be in front of him as he closes his eyes and goes into concentration. The fire and wind engravings on the blade begin to glow as the wind starts to circulate Naruto while his sword catches ablaze, melting snow around him. He inhales a deep breath as he opens his eyes before, flame and wind art elemental combo, heatwave arc. He shouts and yells, swinging his sword in the air as an arc of heated air soars toward the wall as the snow on the floor instantly melts from the heat. The heated air reaches the wall of snow and collides against it before an explosion goes off, resulting in a mixture of cool and warm winds blowing over our heroes while debris of melting snow and ice flies all over the cave from the entrance. Due to the clashing winds, everyone was forced to close their eyes and wait for things to settle. Once they felt the rush of the winds finally settle, everyone opened their eyes and looked at the entrance, only to see the wall of snow had been blown away, with the cold winds from the outside. Naruto grins in seeing the wall had been taken care of as he spins his sword around before sheathing before he turns back to the girls. Shall we continue on our journey? He asks in a sophisticated tone, much to the girls' humor as they giggle. Yes we shall. Right, girls. Bloom says and the others nod. The winx exit the cave and resume their journey towards the royal castle. An hour passes and they continue walking along the deep snow, making it slightly difficult for them to walk as the cold winds were blow onto their faces, making the teens brace against it. Is it just me or did it get colder than BBB before? Stella asks, slightly shivering as she holds herself for warmth. Guess that blizzard had a more lasting effect than just more snow and ice. Flora says. How much further until we get to the castle, Tekna? Naruto asks, turning to the tech-savvy fairy as she was looking at her data reader, the area's landscape, and trying to pinpoint where the castle could be. From these readings, we have a mile or two until we reach the last known location of the royal castle. Meaning we're close, Tekna says, seeing a map on her device. That's good to hear, Bloom says, feeling relieved to hear they were getting close to their destination. However, before anything else could be said or done, the ground suddenly starts to shake violently, alerting the teens. What's happening now? Musa yells as she and everyone else were fighting against the shaking for balance. Eventually, the shaking stops, leaving the teens to be relieved but confused. What was that all about? The musical fairy asks, wanting to know what just happened. Earthquake. An avalanche nearby maybe. Flora asks, but Naruto shakes his head. No, something like that doesn't happen in an instant. Something caused that, but what? Naruto says with a frown as he tries to figure out what was the cause of that shaking. However, the ground starts to shake again, just not as violently as before. The teens again fight for balance against the shaking. The shaking quickly stops unlike before, and this confuses the teens on why the shaking stops suddenly when Stella senses movement near her. She turns to where she was feeling this and her eyes widen in shock at what she was staring at. Guys, I think I know what caused that, Stella lowly says as she takes a step back with a frightened expression on her face. What, Stella? Bloom asks as she and everyone look at the Solarian princess and see she was taking steps back while having a frightened expression. Look, Stella screams before she points at something. Everyone turns to where Stella was pointing and their eyes widen in seeing something large emerge from what they thought was another snow-covered hill, only for that to not be true as it turned out to be a large white-furred yeti-like monster that had large tusks and ice spikes on its back. The monster looks down at the teens with its red eyes and it roars, causing the teens to take a step back in fear. Let's get out of here now. Bloom yells, prompting the others to run away while the monster again roars before it starts stomping after the teens. The teens continue running away from the Yeti monster while the monster was gradually gaining on them. Eventually, the monster had enough of chasing after the teens and it slammed its hands onto the ground, causing the ground to shake and all the snow that was around them to fall, forming an avalanche, one the teens saw, and before they could do anything about it, they were caught by it and were buried under a sheet of snow. Fortunately for our heroes, the snow wasn't thick and they were able to move out of the snow and get back to their feet. Seeing this, the monster lets out another roar and tries to swat them away, but Naruto quickly intervenes as he draws his sword and it ignites into flames. Flame art, Dragon Pierce. Naruto yells, swinging his blade and firing his attack at the monster's hands. The attack collides with the Yeti's hands, burning its palms as it roars from the pain while Naruto glares at it. Yo, Big Ugly, why not pick on someone else? He shouts at the monster before he starts firing more fire-based attacks at the monster. The monster's hit by some of these attacks and roars as it starts swatting its hands down at Naruto, in the hopes of smashing him into the ground, but the blonde dodges these attempts. The girls were at the side but were separated, with Bloom and Stella on one side and Flora, Musa, and Tekna on the other, not too far from the battle as they saw Naruto was dodging the monster's attacks, but some of them were close calls and it looked like he was starting to struggle in evading it. He needs help, Bloom says, and Stella couldn't agree more. The Solarian princess stands forward and glares at the monster. Yeah, stay back Bloom. Me and Naruto will deal with this ugly thing. Magic winx, Stella yells before she disappears in a bright flash. Not long after, the flash dissipated and there stood Stella in her fairy form, ready to deliver a beatdown. That was until a gush of cold wind blew by and Stella immediately started to shiver. Oh, bad idea. Bad idea. 2, she screams before she wraps her arms around the areas of exposed skin. Stella, are you okay? Bloom asks, seeing Stella shivering. No. My butt's FFFF freezing here. 1 second. Stella stutters, her teeth chattering from the intense cold she was experiencing. She quickly realizes that she needs to do something before she freezes to death. So, she gathers her magic and casts a spell. Change. She yells, and once again, she disappears in a bright flash. The flash dissipated and Stella was different than she was mere moments ago. While she was the same, her outfit was different in a way. Most of it was the same, but she had on a white long-sleeve undershirt under her orange crop top which had white fur at the wrists, covering all of her previously exposed skin, white long thighs which covered her thighs. There was white fur on the rim of her skirt, rim of her boots, and rim of her crop top. If you want to know what Stella's outfit looks like, just search, Stella in the Winter by Lena Lee 772 on DeviantArt. Stella lets out a sigh of relief, feeling her body heating up and not freezing. There. Much better, she says before she looks at the monster and she glares at it. Now, let's see if you can take the heat. Sunbeam, she yells as she fires a beam of sunlight magic at the Yeti. The Yeti sees the beam heading towards it and it narrowly moves out of its path, but the light from the attack momentarily blinds it. Naruto sees this and takes the opportunity to attack. The wind engraving begins to profusely glow as the wind starts to pick up. Wind art, razor edge. Naruto yells before swinging his sword at the Yeti as arcs of pressurized wind soar toward it, cutting through the snow in the process as the attack collides with the Yeti, pushing it back while it roars from sharp pain. Everyone looks at it and sees Naruto has caused lacerations on its chest, with blood seeping from the wounds, and the blonde smiles at seeing his handiwork. How was that? You oversized furball, he yells at the beast. The Yeti-like monster's eyes turn red before letting out a loud vicious roar, prompting the teens to close their ears from it as the clouds in the sky darken. Snow and ice move around the monster as a pillar of ice starts to form next to it as our heroes see this and get a bad feeling from this action. Okay, I seriously don't like where this is going, Musa says. Before anything else could be said or done by them, the Yeti picks the ice pillar and throws it at them. Watch out! Stella yells and everyone leaps out of the way of the ice pillar as it crashes into the spot they were standing moments ago. The teens land not too far from where the pillar had hit as they sigh out for relief, but suddenly, the ground once again begins to shake with the teens finding themselves having to fight for their balance. However, as the ground shook, it began to break and split into two, with a crack forming in between the teens. The shaking got worse and the crack in between the teens grew larger, breaking them apart as most of them were on one side. Bloom was on the other side, completely alone. The ground underneath Bloom begins to break, alerting her and the others, and before anyone can do anything, the ground gives out and Bloom slips, falling into the crack. Bloom! Everyone yelled, shocked to see what had happened, but no! Naruto screams before he rushes over to the crack and dives right into it after Bloom, shocking everyone else with his action. Naruto! The others scream, seeing two of their friends disappear into the hole. Before any of them can jump right in an attempt to rescue them, the ground shakes again and the crack closes in on itself, rendering the girls' attempts to rescue Bloom and Naruto. As the girls were in shock after seeing their friend's supposed demise, a shadow casts over them. Flora was the first to notice and she turns, only for her to look up in shock and fear. Guys, we've still got problems, Flora says, drawing everyone else's attention. The others turn and see what Flora was looking at and see the Yeti monster looming behind them, staring down at them. It roars and raises its hands in the air before bringing them down to smash the girls. The four girls quickly react and leap out of the way as the Yeti misses them and smashes the crack, causing snow and ice to quickly fill up the crack and seal it up, where Bloom and Naruto were now trapped. The frozen kingdom of Domino, Magix. Deep down at the bottom of the now sealed crack, we see snow falling onto the floor where various sized debris were lying buried in it. Everything is still and silent when suddenly, the tip of a sword shoots out from under the snow as it moves away and we see Naruto had been buried under the snow. He pants a bit before he coughs a little as he calms down and looks around his surroundings, seeing he was in an icy cavern. Where am I? Naruto mutters, dazed from the fall as he shakes his head to clear away the cobwebs and stands up, knocking off most of the snow from his body before he continues looking around. He looks around until he remembers how he got to this place and who he was trying to save. Bloom, he says, now looking for a sign of the redhead. Bloom, where are you? He yells, hoping she could hear him. Ah, Naruto heard a muffled groan that was coming not too far from him. He looked around for where that groan came from and he saw a gloved hand sticking out from under a bunch of snow. His eyes widen, as he realizes whose hand was sticking out. Bloom, Naruto yells as he rushes over to where Bloom was buried and starts pushing the snow away from her. Not long later, he frees Bloom from the snow and gently helps her sit up. Bloom, are you alright? He asks, looking concerned at Bloom as she starts coughing. Why yeah, I'm fine. Bloom says after calming her coughing, and Naruto feels relieved from hearing that. Oh, that's a relief to hear. Naruto says. Well, it's thanks to your quick thinking we're really lucky to come out from this not hurt. If you didn't stab your sword into the wall to slow us down, we would have been in a lot of pain right now. Bloom says with a small smile as Naruto helps her back to her feet. What Bloom was talking about was that after Naruto dived into the crack after her, he managed to catch up to her mid-fall and caught her as they continued to fall down the hole. While falling, Naruto maneuvers to the wall and stabs his sword into it, slowing down their speed before slipping from the wall and crashing down to the floor where they were. Yeah, Naruto says as he looks around and realizes where they were. So, we're at the bottom of a crevasse or an underground cavern, huh? He says. Yeah, we are. Bloom says as she drops her hood and pulls her goggles up to her head while Naruto also pulls his hood off, takes his goggles, and lets them hang around his neck. We need to find a way out of here and get back with the others, they might need our help. She says and Naruto nods. Yeah, Naruto says before he lifts his sword and taps onto it and it catches ablaze, illuminating the craven. He moves his makeshift torch and spots a tunnel in front of them. He walks over to it and moves his sword, seeing it look like a path. This could lead us to the way out. Come on, let's get moving. He says, turning to Bloom who nods and they walk into the tunnel, hoping it was the way out. Meanwhile, back at the surface, the Yeti roams around the frozen terrain while looking around, searching for the rest of the winx who had vanished after they evaded his attack. While he continues to walk away, he doesn't notice someone peeking from a boulder behind him. The person peeking from the boulder sees it walk away before lowering their head back behind the boulder. Okay, that beast is leaving, Stella says to the others who were with her behind the boulder. So, now what? What could we do? Flora asks and Tekna punches her fists together. I say we attack that thing now when it's least expecting. We do a surprise attack and take it out. Tenka says, with an enraged expression, taking everyone else by surprise. Whoa, Tekna, what's going on? Musa asks, wondering what was wrong with the tech-savvy fairy since she has never been one to express anger ever from the entire time they've known her. What? That thing killed our friends and we have to avenge them by taking it out. It only fits in this situation. Tekna explains. No, let's not. Flora says, causing everyone to look at her in shock or surprise. What? Tekna yells, looking at Flora as if she had two heads. Why not? She yells, wanting to know why they couldn't attack the Yeti monster. You heard Stella, that thing is leaving. That means it thinks we're gone. Let's keep it that way. If we were to attack it now, it'll only provoke it and it'll try and kill us. And besides, we don't know if Bloom and Naruto are dead, they might have survived and are trapped in some cave. The best thing we can do is focus on finding them before something else happens. Flora explains, pointing out the cons if they did choose to attack the monster. The others thought about her explanation and realized she was telling the truth, but Tekna frowned. Yeah, Flora's right. If we did attack it now, we'd only wasting time. We came here for something related to the Great Dragon and Bloom's the only one who can contact it. We have to find them, I know they're still alive, I can feel it. Musa says, placing her hand on Tekna's shoulder, and flashes a reassuring smile. Tenka thinks about her and Flora's words and realizes they were telling the truth, seeing they couldn't get emotional now, not when the fate of magics and the entire magic dimension was on the line. I see, Tekna says, after a while of not saying anything as she calms down and looks at the others before giving them a nod. Okay, let's go find them. I'm sorry for getting railed up like that, girls. She says. It's okay, Tekna. That happens to the best of us. Flora says with a smile as Stella nods. Yeah, it happens a lot. But damn girl, we never seen you get railed up like that, even after you were trapped in the closet by Flora's plants. Stella says. Again, sorry about that. Flora says and Tekna waves her hand at her, dismissing the apology, but her expression changes to a bashful one. No, like I said, it's all good. No harm done. But, I guess after spending time with you guys, I've been able to learn how to express my emotions better. I've come to consider you guys, Bloom, and Naruto as my best friends, Tekna says as she rubs her arm with a small blush on her face. Everyone looks at Tekna with surprised expressions on their faces. They weren't expecting to hear or see Tekna express emotion like that, but they weren't upset by this at all. Wow, I wasn't expecting to hear something like that from you, Tekna. But thank you, I consider you and everyone else in the Winx Club as my best friends and I'm sure we all feel the same. Stella says with a smile as Musa and Flora nod with smiles on their faces. Hearing this, Tekna lets out a sigh she didn't know she was holding and was relieved to hear the others felt the same as she smiles as well. Thank you, girls, Tekna says. So, should we go and look for Bloom and Naruto or should we go and look for the castle? I say we try and look for Bloom and Naruto first, and when we find them then we can go and look for the royal castle. But how? Thanks to that monster, the crack was sealed and we can't tell where it was. Whoa, girls, you might wanna see this. Musa says, drawing the others' attention as they turn to her and see she was staring at something. Following her line of sight, the others turn and see tall columns of ice in front of them with one in the middle being the largest in size and height. What are those? Tekna asks, wondering what was in front of them. Flora narrowed her eyes as she took a closer look at the columns and saw something was inside the ice, frozen in it, and saw it was a building of sorts. Those look like castle towers. Flora says, causing the others to look at the columns and see that froze inside of the ice, looked like to be castle towers. You don't think, Musa says, as everyone were thinking the same thing she was. Could those frozen towers be connected to the royal castle? Only one way to find out. Stella says as she raises her right hand and takes off her ring. Solaria, she yells before tossing the ring into the air, summoning her scepter and she catches it. Stella spins her scepter, conjuring magic to the base as she looks at the columns. Solarian light. The Solarian princess yells, swinging her scepter at one of the columns as a beam of hot bright magic is shot from her scepter. The beam hits the column and the ice starts to melt, revealing the tower. It's working. The ice is melting, Flora says, looking happy that their theory was right. Yeah, but the tower looks smaller than how most are. Musa says, looking at the tower and seeing how short it was. Tekna looks at the tower and sees how it was stuck in the snow. That's because the rest of it has been buried under the snow and ice. Tekna says. Hearing this, Stella stops her spell and once again starts spinning her scepter. That means the rest of the castle has to be right under our feet. Stella says. She spins her scepter a bit more before stopping and tapping the ground with it, sending a pulse of sun magic across the ice and snow, melting it away as they see a large castle frozen under their feet. Girls, we've found Domino's royal castle. A few minutes ago. Back with Bloom and Naruto. Meanwhile, the duo of Bloom and Naruto were busy traversing through the tunnel, looking for a way out with Naruto's sword illuminating their way. Man, this tunnel is long. Naruto comments, as they've been walking for some time now. Bloom agrees by nodding her head. Yeah, I just hope that this at least leads us somewhere. Bloom says. They continue to walk for a while before Bloom notices something just in front of them to their left. Wait, what's that up ahead? She asks, gaining Naruto's attention as he looks ahead and sees what she is spotting. A way out maybe, Naruto says. The duo walked up to what they were seeing and stopped as they were in front of an opening, thinking it was another path in the tunnel, but to their surprise, it wasn't a path, it was a broken window that led to something. Wait, what the blonde says, looking surprised at seeing a hallway in front of them. This isn't a tunnel or even a cavern. It looks like a hallway. Bloom says. Let's go in, maybe there's a way out through here. Naruto says and Bloom agrees, so the two crawl through the broken window, carefully to not get cut by the glass as they were in the hallway, and look around, seeing all the interesting objects on the walls before they start walking down the hall. What is this place? Bloom says as they look around, taking in their surroundings and seeing the state these items were in as they enter a large room where a long table was located in the middle of the room, with plates, glasses, and utensils were spread across the table, all broken or rusted of course. Naruto looks around and sees damage to the room as if a battle took place here. I don't know, but this place was ravaged before getting covered by the ice. Look at the fire damage and all the damage in various spots around the room. Naruto says, pointing to the damage, and Bloom looks at it and can't help but agree with him. Yeah, Bloom says as she walks over to the table and runs her fingers across the wood. She does this before she closes her eyes and grabs her head. She hums, drawing Naruto's attention. What's wrong, Bloom? Naruto asks as he looks at Bloom and sees her grabbing her head like she was experiencing a headache as the redhead seemingly calms down and opens her eyes and has this confused frown on her face. I don't know. I have this strange feeling like I've been here before, I don't know why, but this place just feels familiar to me. Bloom says, wondering why she saw a vision of this room, but it was a lot better than how it was now in her mind. That left her confused. I see, Naruto says as he continues to walk around the room, looking over various items before he stops at a wall by a large double door and looks up as he sees something that catches his eyes, something that makes his eyes go wide in shock. Whoa, no way, he utters, but due to the size of the room, his voice echoes through the room and makes Bloom turn to him. Insert OST, Despair by Yasuharu Takanashi, from Naruto Shippuden, original soundtrack. What's wrong, Naruto? Bloom asks, looking at Naruto and seeing him looking at something with his mouth open. Bloom, you need to come over here and see this, Naruto says. Curious by Naruto's change, Bloom walks over to him to see what was going on with him and looks up and sees what he was looking at and her eyes widen in shock. Wah, Bloom utters, seeing something that utterly flipped her world. What the two were looking at was a burnt, worn-out portrait of a man and a woman. A man of tall stature with short brown hair, thin brown eyes, a small pointed beard, and tanned skin, and a woman with a light skin tone, a tall and slender frame, long locks of curly red hair, and bright green eyes as they were standing in the portrait. The man wore an attire that consisted of a royal red bodysuit with large, open sleeves that ended with large fluffed cuffs. He had a large metal headpiece that expanded over his shoulders and opened up enough above his head to show off a large gold crown. There were two red spots in the shape of rounded diamonds on each side of the headpiece just over his ears. From the back of the headpiece rested the man's fur cape, which flowed down to the ground with a sizable amount that rested behind him. In front of the man's headpiece rested a large white cloth topped with an ornate golden collar with a symbol at the center of the collar containing a red and blue circle with a four-pointed yellow star. The cloth was bound to his bodysuit by a large golden belt. The woman wore an attire that consisted of a long bright green dress with paler green and pink accents. Large green and pink shoulder blades were poking out from the sides as her green sleeves became large, puffy, and lighter in color around her elbows. Their buffs were bound to her wrist by two pink jewels. The torso of the dress consisted of a pink corset bodice with dark pinkish-purple patterns on the front, and the rest of the dress flowed from there and seemingly went past her feet. The woman also had a small gold necklace with a large pinkish-purple gemstone that matched the ones on her cuffs. Lastly, she had an elegant pale pink fur cape that flowed from behind her down to the ground as it curled inward. It also doubled as a boa of sorts as it splits off into two slimmer stands at the front that flow down to just above the queen's feet. The woman also had her hair in a large updo adorned with a ring of pearls and a three-pointed crown with her bangs styled in long curled tendrils cascading down the sides of her face, neck, and back. She also wore light pink lipstick and faint green eyeshadow. I think that's the king and queen of Domino. And if this portrait is here, that would mean, Naruto says, drawing to a conclusion in his mind, and Bloom was also drawing the same conclusion. They were in the royal castle. This is the royal castle, this is my home, was my home, and they were my biological parents, Bloom utters, looking around the room, now realizing that this was part of her home, and seeing the state it was in, from the damage to the ice covering it, and she realized what or rather who was responsible for all this. Tears begin to form in her eyes as she clenches her fists in anger. Her canines start to enlarge while her irises turn amber-orange before she closes her eyes. Why did the three evil witches have to come and attack my home? Why did they have to come and ruin my life? Why did this have to happen? Why? She shouts, slamming her fist against the wall, causing a small crack to form where she punches as tears begin to flow down her cheeks. She was about to punch the wall again when Naruto suddenly dropped his sword, grabbed her, and pulled her into a tight hug, stopping her from punching the wall again. Bloom, calm down, just calm down, please. Naruto says, holding Bloom tightly as the girl shakes in his arms, trying to get away from him. He removes his arms from her body and places them on her face, making her look at him. Look at me, Bloom, just look at me. Remember what I said to you back at Alfie. Your story may not have a happy beginning, but that doesn't make who you are, it's the rest of your story. And you have the power to make things better. I know this, the others know this, and even your parents know this too. We're here for you, to help you, to protect you. We're here for you, he says, looking at her with a determined expression while wiping away her tears. Bloom sees this and can tell he means every word he says. So, she sniffs and nods her head. Yeah, you're right, Bloom says as she hugs Naruto, and he returns the hug while Bloom's features revert to normal. They stay like this for a bit, just holding onto each other before they let go of each other as Naruto looks at Bloom, once again placing his hands onto her cheeks, and looks at her while she looks at him. Feeling better? Naruto asks and Bloom nods. Yeah, I'm fine now. Thanks for cheering me up again. Sorry for getting upset like that, Bloom says, making her head look down at the floor, but Naruto wasn't having that as he moved her head, making her look back at him with a smile. Hey, it's fine, Bloom. While I understand why you got so frustrated, I do know what's it like to get it sucks to see you all upset like that. So please, don't ever get upset, okay? Naruto asks, looking at her as Bloom looks at him and can't help but smile and nod, indicating that she agrees with him. Seeing this, Naruto felt happy and was feeling better now. He then looked up at the portrait and couldn't help but notice something. Plus, there's a bright side here, he says, gaining Bloom's attention. Like what? Bloom asks, looking at Naruto with a raised eyebrow, wondering what was he talking about. Naruto just points at the portrait, especially at the woman. I found out where you got your beauty, Naruto says, making Bloom pay close attention to the portrait and see that she and her mom did have similarities to each other. Your mom, she has a striking resemblance to you. If she was this beautiful, then that means you'll be like her or even more when you're older. He says. He doesn't see Bloom looking down as a massive blush appears on her cheeks. Why you think so? Bloom softly asks as she discreetly looks up at Naruto and sees him nod, making her look back down as she sheepishly smiles. That's nice to hear, thank you for the compliment, she says, feeling butterflies in her stomach, while her thoughts were running wild. He thinks I'm beautiful, she yells in her mind. As she was thinking, the castle starts to shake, alerting them. End Ost. An earthquake. Again, Naruto says, wondering what was causing this earthquake again. He then senses a pulse of magic, light magic, causing him to be confused. Wait, that was a pulse of light magic, that would mean, he thought as he sensed another pulse of magic, and this time, he recognized this magical pressure. His eyes widen as he realizes who it was. He turns to Bloom and grabs her hand. Come on Bloom, follow me, he says before he drags Bloom with him, as they leave the room. But before they exited the room, Naruto grabbed his sword from the floor and they start running through the castle. Where are we going, Naruto? What's going on? Bloom asks, wondering what was going on, and why was Naruto acting like this. If whatever's caused that earthquake is what I think it is, we're about to meet with the others, Naruto says, and they continue to run the castle for a bit until they enter the courtyard of the castle. Naruto looks up and scans for something until he finds what he was looking for. There, look up at the ice, he says as he points at the ice. Bloom looks up and sees 4 pairs of feet standing on the ice above them. Are those the others? Bloom asks and Naruto nods. Yep, Naruto says as he draws his sword from his back. Let's get their attention, he says before he spins his sword. As the wind starts spinning around the two, he looks up at the ice and aims at a side a bit far from the other's feet. Wind art, saw lock. He yells, swinging his sword, and a saw-blade-like attack sprouts from his swing as the attack soars through the air and collides with the ice. Cracks begin to appear as the ice begins to break apart and some start falling to them, forcing the two to start to move out of the way. Meanwhile, back on the surface, the others were looking at the melted parts of the royal castle when they felt something hit onto the ice below them, causing them to look down to see what was happening. Whoa, what was that? Musa asks. She was trying to keep her balance and the other were doing the same. I don't know, Flora says. This goes on for a bit before she hears a loud cracking sound below them. She looks down and sees cracks appearing on the ice with some of it breaking apart. The ice is breaking apart. She yells, alerting the others. Stella, did you do something? Tekna asks. No, I didn't. Stella yells, knowing that there was no way she did something for this happen. Then what's happening? Musa asks. Before anyone could say anything, the ground continues to break apart and the ice was becoming something they couldn't stand for much longer. Let's get away from here. Stella yells as she flies off from the ground while the others run away from the area just as it finally breaks away. The three continued to run and made it to a safer spot and were safely before turning back to the castle to see the rest of the castle was revealed. What was that? Flora asks while looking at the spot they were standing moments ago. I have no idea, Stella says, hovering above the others as she lands next to Musa. But that earthquake uncovered the rest of the castle, she says, seeing the mist clearing away as they see the castle. They cautiously walk towards the castle, minding their steps to have a closer look at the castle when. Hello up there. They hear a familiar voice call out to them below. The four looked down and were surprised to see Naruto and Bloom standing in the courtyard, smiling at them. Bloom, Naruto. The four yells, feeling relieved to see them, and we're alright. You're okay. Yeah, we're fine, but you guys got to come down here. We've got something to show you. Bloom shouts at them while Naruto sheathes his sword. Sure, the others will come down. I'll stay up here and melt away the rest of the ice and snow. Stella says as the others nod before they start making their way down to the courtyard, minding their steps so they won't slip and fall. While they were doing this, Stella flew up into the air and ascended until she was at the same height level as the castle and spun her scepter again, gathering her magic for the spell she had in mind to use. Once she felt she had gathered the necessary magic, Stella stopped spinning her scepter, lifted it above her head, and yelled, Solarian light. The scepter releases a bright flash as a ball of sunlight forms from the scepter and hovers above Stella and shines bright rays of light down onto the frozen castle. The rays of light start causing the ice and snow to melt away, alas at a slow pace. Seeing this, Tekna hops onto a high vantage point and raises her hands at Stella and the ball of light. Digi-Dome, Tekna yells, freeing her magic at the blonde princess, and her magic forms around Stella as a digitized dome materializes her in the ball of light. There, the spell I cast acts as a concentric dome. Ionic particles you're generating will be catalyzed, Stella. Tekna explains. However, Stella was confused by her explanation. Could you explain that better, Tekna? Stella asks, causing Tekna to roll her eyes as she realizes how Stella was. Never mind, let's just say I've made your job easier. Tekna says and Stella finally understands. Oh, okay. Stella says as she continues her spell, allowing it to continue melting the ice and snow away until there was none of it left, revealing the castle in its full glory. There, all better. The Solarian princess says, letting out a sigh as she releases her spell, dispersing the ball of light while Tekna releases her spell and they return to the others. Good job, you two. Flora says. She and Musa had dropped their hoods and pulled their goggles up to their heads. Bloom looks around the courtyard and the rest of the castle and sees the damaged state it was in and she gains a sad expression. The place is a total mess. The three evil witches have destroyed everything. Bloom says, feeling sad at seeing the state of what could have been her home was in. What if the tricks do the same thing to the entire magic dimension? She asks, now realizing that the tricks were direct descendants of the three evil witches, with the power of the dragon flame, and she couldn't imagine what they could do if they were left unchecked. As she thinks this and shivers at the thought, she feels a hand being placed on her shoulder and she looks to see Musa was the one with her hand on her shoulder as the music lover was smiling at her. We're not going to let them do it. We've beaten them before, we can do it again. Trust us, Bloom, we can do it. Musa says, assuring Bloom that hope is still with them. Bloom hears her words and she closes her eyes, and nods, knowing now that they couldn't lose their nerve yet. I hope you're right, Bloom says. Hey guys, come here. There's something here. The girls hear Naruto speak and they turn to see him standing by a hole in the ground. They walked over to him to see what he was looking at. Check it out, Naruto says, pointing down at the hole. The girls look down at the hole and they see a bunch of hallways. The underground hallways, they're not damaged. Tekna says, realizing what these hallways were. Looks like the three evil witches didn't know about them. Flora says, pointing out how there was little to no damage to the hallways. Hearing this, Bloom gains an idea. If that's the case, maybe we'll find something down there. Bloom suggests and the others thought the idea was okay. So, they all hoped on. Looks like no one has been down here for ages. The redhead says, commenting on the cobwebs that were everywhere. Tekna activates a hologram projection of the castle and scans the hallway they were in for any sign of life, but the scan picks up nothing. No detection of any footprints or other life forms in the hallways. Tekna says as she discards her hologram projection. Meanwhile, Naruto draws his sword and taps onto it, reigniting its flames so he can illuminate the hallway. Seeing this, Stella lifts her scepter and creates a light-based torch to help Naruto illuminate the hallway. There, now we can see. Stella says. So, which way do we go? Naruto asks, looking around the hallway and seeing they have two ways to go. But before anyone could say or suggest what they should do, something happened. Bloom. A heavenly voice speaks, causing only Bloom to freeze up. Huh. Bloom stutters, clearly not expecting to hear the voice as she starts looking around the hallway for the source of the voice. Who said that? She asks, drawing the others' attention. What's up, Bloom? Flora asks as. Did any of you hear someone saying my name? Bloom asks and everyone else frowns before shaking their heads. No, none of us said your name. Why? Naruto asks. I heard someone call out to me. Bloom says, causing everyone else to raise an eyebrow at that. Tekna pulls out her hologram projection and scans the hallway to see if there was anyone else there with them, but she sees no one else. Strange, I'm detecting any lifeforms in the area besides us. Tekna says before she discards the hologram projection. Bloom. The heavenly voice speaks again, making Bloom to start look at the hallway. There it is again. Bloom says as she looks around the hallway for the one who was calling her. Who said that? She asks as everyone looks at her. I did. The heavenly voice speaks. This time, however, everyone else freezes as they hear it. Wait, I heard that this time. Musa says as Stella, Flora, and Tekna nod their heads, confirming they have the voices all. Naruto shifts into a defensive stance as he looks around while everyone else puts their guards up. Who's there? Show yourself, Naruto yells. Do not be afraid, I bring no harm. I am here to help. The heavenly voice calmly speaks in a tone the teens could tell it was telling the truth. So, Naruto slowly drops his stance, but he and everyone else. Then who are you? Stella asks. The voice doesn't speak and everyone thought it left when a bright flash goes off behind them. They turn to the flash and see a transparent figure start appearing before them. It was a disembodied woman who looked like to be their age, with pale blonde hair and was glowing orange. Her hair was styled in two pigtails that were barely reaching her shoulders, curling at the ends, while the rest of her hair fell to her shoulder blades. She wore a form-fitting, flowing, golden yellow dress with a plunging neckline. Around her waist was a thin pale yellow ribbon with three trailing ribbons with red oval-shaped designs at the ends. There were amber-orange rings around her biceps and wrists that each had pale yellow flowing silks attached to them. Along with a mask donned on her face, she wore a yellow crown with a red jewel in the center at the top, and a pale yellow headpiece resembling angel wings. 1. Hello, everyone. The transparent woman greets the teens with a warm smile. Everyone looks at her with surprised expressions, but Bloom was looking at the woman with a shocked expression as she recognizes her. Why you? The person I saw in my dreams. Bloom utters, remembering this woman from the dreams she had earlier in the year and from looking at the research she tried to get at the library. The transparent woman looks at her and warmly smiles. Yes, that was me. I am Daphne the nymph. Nymph of magics. And your older sister, Bloom. The transparent woman, now known as Daphne, says, causing everyone. My sister. Bloom utters, her eyes widen in shock as tears begin to appear in them. She couldn't believe it. This woman was her sister. Wow, she's beautiful. Stella mutters, in awe at Daphne's beauty. Yeah, Naruto couldn't help but agree as he stared at Daphne. Damn, are all the women in the royal families across magics beautiful or something? He thought, thinking it had to be something with fate, genetics, or sheer luck for something like this to happen since he'd seen Stella, Bloom's mom, and now Daphne and saw how beautiful they were. But I do like her choice of color for her outfit. At long last, we meet. It is so nice to see you, Bloom. Daphne says before she turns around. Quickly, we don't have much time. Follow me, she says as she floats down the hallway, leaving the other teens to think about whether or not to follow her. Should we? Musa asks as everyone looks at one another, deciding whether or not to follow the spirit. What other choice do we have? Tekna says, shrugging her shoulders. With that, the teens follow Daphne down the hall. Daphne continues to float down the hall in a particular direction while the winx follow closely behind her. This goes on for a bit before Daphne momentarily fades away, alerting the teens. Daphne! Bloom yells, concerned about her sister, and is about to do something when Daphne's form regains its appearance and she holds her hand out at Bloom, stopping her. Don't speak, just listen. I am fine, I barely have enough magic to maintain this connection, so we don't have time to talk. Daphne says, it took a moment for her to regain her composure before she starts floating again as the others resume following her again. I was once the nymph of Lake Rockalus, but it was in this castle that we were born. What you seek, you will not find here. She says, unaware that what she said caused the teens to stop in their tracks, shocked at what was revealed. Wait, so we came here for nothing? Naruto yells after a while, angry that they came to Domino for no reason. Daphne, however, shakes her head at the statement. No, you all did come for something. Daphne says as she turns to Bloom and looks at her. Bloom, you will finally learn about your origin, the past, and your destiny. My destiny, Bloom utters as Daphne nods. Yes, and in this room in front of us, is where you'll learn all. Daphne says as she floats up to a large double door. She looks at the teens as she floats to the door and places her hand on it. Welcome to Domino's treasure room, she says before opening the door, and revealing to the teens that the room was filled to the brim with various treasures, weapons, trophies, and relics. Whoa, the teens utter in shock from all the treasure in this large room. Wow, Stella, I think Bloom's richer than you. Musa comments as Stella giggles. Oh no, now who'll I ask for when I'm strapped for cash? Stella giggles. Naruto walks around the room, looking at all the treasures and weapons, and was mesmerized by the sight until something catches his eye. What's that? Naruto thought as he walked over to a pile of golden coins where various weapons and relics were lying on top of the coins. He sees a handle wrapped in old, worn-out bandages with a ring-like pommel at the bottom of the handle stabbed into the pile of coins and he frowns. He grabs the handle, pulls out the weapon, and looks at it, only to see he found the same black dagger he had seen like the one back at Red Fountain back at the exhibition day. Another one of those blades. First the one at Red Fountain's relic room and now one has been here as well. What could this mean, and who did they belong to? He thought, wondering why were there more of these strange daggers and who did they originally belong to. Deciding on looking into this on a later date, Naruto discreetly pulls the sleeve on his left arm and uses his seal ruin to stash the dagger in it. Guess I can take this one to look at later. As this was happening, Daphne floated to the front of the room, where a glass casing was lying on top of a small table. The transparent woman looks at Bloom. Bloom, come here, there is something for you. Daphne says, gesturing at Bloom to come over. Bloom cautiously walks over, while everyone else watches, and moves up the steps to the glass casing as she looks down at the casing and sees a silver crown resting in the glass. Bloom frowns, upon seeing the crown. Wait, I've seen this crown before, Somewhere, Bloom says as Daphne smiles. It is you, Daphne says, causing Bloom's eyes to widen. The crown is mine. Bloom asks and Daphne nods. Yes, it is rightfully yours. Take it and all will be revealed. Daphne says as she uses her magic and lifts the glass casing off the table and freeing the crown. Bloom looks at the crown resting on the table as she steadily reaches for it. She grabs the crown and holds it close to her face. Suddenly, Bloom senses a rush flowing through her body as her eyes widen while her pupils turn amber-orange again and her irises sharpen and turn into silts. Everyone else took a step back when they sensed a powerful pulse of magic erupt from Bloom. Bloom, your destiny has always been to inherit the great dragon flame, a power meant to defend all forms of good against the forces of evil. An angelic, wise voice speaks as visions of Domino, before the state it was in, appear in Bloom's mind. Days after you were born, the three evil witches, the first creatures that had been known as pure evil in the magic's dimension, learned for your birth and destiny, came to Domino and launched a large-scale attack on the kingdom in hopes of capturing the great dragon flame. The voice says as the vision changes to one where the three evil witches appear on Domino and start causing havoc on the kingdom and people, destroying various buildings and killing people and guards as they make their way to the castle. Learning this, your sister, Daphne, took you down below the castle's lower levels, transferred the dragon flame from her into you, and used its power to teleport you to somewhere safe off-world, Earth. When the three evil witches finally entered the castle and learned that you and the dragon flame has vanished. Angered by this failure, they attacked Daphne. Overwhelmed by the numbers and power gap, Daphne was killed by them and the witches then set about destroying Domino, sending it into its current frozen state. The voice says as the vision changes to Daphne transferring the dragon flame onto a baby Bloom and teleporting her to Earth just moments before the three evil witches arrived and killed Daphne. The king and queen, have been convinced that they lost both of their beloved daughters, went into exile to grief. Today, they still mourn for their beloved girls. The vision and the voice stop as everyone senses the pulse fades away before Bloom drops to her knees and lets her crown slip off from her hands, with it hitting the ground and rolling off from the steps as it rolls to the feet of the others. Insert OST, From Me to You by Yuki Hayashi from Boku no Hero Academia OST. Bloom, is something wrong? Flora asks. They start hearing sobs as they see tears dropping from Bloom's face and hitting the ground while her body was shaking. My mom, my dad, Daphne, Bloom mutters, tears flowing down her cheeks. Bloom, what happened? What happened when you picked up that crown? Stella asks, moving over to Bloom and crouched down to her as Bloom lifts her head, revealing her eyes had returned to normal with tears flowing down her eyes and cheeks. She looks at everyone and sniffs before deciding to tell them what she saw. They all died from the attack on Domino, everyone in the kingdom, were killed at the hands of the witches. Daphne sacrificed herself to save me and gave me the dragon flame. She was the original keeper of it. I was given it by her before she sent me to Earth. I also found out what happened to my birth parents. They're alive, but I don't know where they are, Bloom says before she breaks down, leaving everyone reeling from what she revealed. Oh, no, Bloom, Flora says, looking at Bloom with a sad expression, feeling sympathy for the redhead, while Musa and Tekna feel the same. Stella wraps her arms around Bloom and holds her close. Naruto frowns, busy processing Bloom's words as one sticks with him. That means you have a chance. Naruto mutters to himself, but his voice was loud enough for everyone else to hear as they look at him. What? Musa asks and Naruto looks at them. You said your parents are out there, grieving for you and your sister, right? That means they're out there somewhere, waiting and you have a chance to go and look for them. Your parents are alive, Bloom, and you can go and look for them. Naruto says, looking at Bloom as she takes in his words and her eyes widen. Realizing he was right, her mother and father were still alive, out there somewhere in Magix. But, I have no idea where they could be, I don't even know where to begin looking for them, Bloom mutters as she looks down, knowing it was nearly hopeless for her to go and look for her parents when they could be anywhere in Magix, hiding in exile. Hearing this, Naruto looks down and sees the dropped crown resting near his feet. He bends down for the crown, grabs it, and walks over to Bloom and Stella, before going down on one knee and presents the crown to Bloom, who is surprised by this gesture as Naruto smiles. That's why we're here. As Tekna said back at Granny's office, we're the Winx Club. We'll always stick together, no matter what comes our way, and we'll help you on your quest in finding your parents. Naruto says, looking at Bloom as he smiles. Bloom was surprised to hear this. Naruto was offering his help to her in searching for her parents when he rightfully had no oblations to. She looked at him and the others and saw they were also smiling at her. Are really? Bloom asks, tears still flowing down her eyes as everyone nods. Yeah, Bloom. We're the Winx Club, we're in this together. Flora says, wiping away some of the tears that were building in her eyes. Yeah, I'll help you look for your parents too, Bloom. Tekna says. Ditto. Musa chimes in. You'll not be alone in this, Bloom. We're your friends, and we'll help you. Stella says, hugging Bloom close to herself. Bloom couldn't believe it. Her friends, people she's only known for the better part of half a year, people who went hell and back with her, were willing to help her look for her parents. Tears once again appear in her eyes, but this time, these tears were tears of overwhelming emotions such as relief and joy, as she feels extremely lucky to have such great friends. Ost time, 1:33. You guys, thank you. Bloom says, wiping her tears away as she looks up at Daphne, who had been silently watching them. Daphne, I want to thank you for saving my life. I'll go and defeat the tricks, and once I'm done, I'll go and look for our parents, that I promise you. The redhead says with clear determination and confidence in her tone, something that had been missing for some time. Daphne sees this change and smiles. And I know you will, Bloom. I will be watching over you as you go on this journey. Daphne says. Suddenly, her body starts to flicker, causing everyone to be on alert as she looks at her hand and sees what's happening. Looks like my connection is wearing off, my time is up. The spirit says before she looks at her sister. I'm proud of the woman and princess you're becoming, Bloom. I know you'll do great things. I believe in you, she says, and Bloom flashes a small smile, feeling happy to hear that. Bloom soon loses her smile as she realizes Daphne was fading away. So, she looks at Daphne with a sad expression. Will I ever see you again, Daphne? Bloom shyly asks, not wanting this time to be the last time she'll see her sister. Daphne sees Bloom's expression and she slightly smiles before she floats down to Bloom and was in front of her. I will never leave your side, Bloom. I will be there, to help you when you truly need help. Daphne says as she wraps her arms around Bloom, and despite being a spirit, the redhead could feel her arms around her. I love you, my dear baby sister. I hope to see you again soon, she says, hugging Bloom, who's standing there for a bit before she wraps her arms around Daphne as the two sisters hug one another. Me too, big sister. Bloom says, acknowledging Daphne as her sister. Unaware that Daphne heard her and was feeling extremely happy to be called that by her. Eventually, Daphne starts to turn into magical particles as she lets go of Bloom and was about to disappear when she looks at Naruto and senses his energies, and her eyes widen. Is he the one that fate foretold? The one who will bring all together and stand as one? Daphne thought, looking at Naruto with suspicious, since he did fit something she remembered hearing once when she was alive. If so, please, protect my sister and hold her dear to you, child of prophecy. She thought, deciding to hold those thoughts for the time being as she started to fade quicker. I wish you all the best of luck in your upcoming battle against the tricks. May the forces of good be with you all. Those were Daphne's final words to the 6 teenagers before she finally disappeared from the teens' sight, leaving them in the treasure room as they process what they learned just now. After some time passes, Naruto and Stella help Bloom back to her feet as the male blonde hands her the crown. Bloom takes her crown and looks at it for a bit, her thoughts and emotions running in her mind as she stares at the crown. Finally, Bloom takes a deep breath and pulls out her backpack before she securely places it in the bag. She straps her bag back to her back and she looks at the others with a determined expression. Once the others saw and knew what they had to do, they turned around and processed in leaving the room and the castle, now knowing that their mission is now complete. End Ost. The Winx were now walking out of the royal castle, knowing the true reasons for Domino and Bloom's origins. They stood in front of the main gate, still silent from all they learned as none of them had a way to speak. So, what's now? Musa finally asks, breaking the silence as everyone thinks about what should they do. Bloom clenches her fists as her determined expression remains. We go back to Alfie and relay everything we know to Granny. And then think of a way to fight back against the tricks while also trying to get the dragon flame back. Bloom says, unaware that her pupils briefly turn from blue to amber orange as everyone looks at her with a surprised look, but they don't mind it as they smile. That sounds like a plan. Flora says while Stella nods. It's been a while since we've seen you this hyped up. Stella says. Looks like that fire you always had finally found its spark again. Naruto says, grinning as he was happy Bloom was finally starting to come back to herself. It was about time. Now, with that out of the way, how are we going to get back to Alfie? Tekna asked the question that had been on her mind for a while now. This causes everyone to stop and think about how would they get back to Alfie. As they were thinking of ways to get back to Alfie when one of them noticed something looming at the top of a hill nearby of the castle. Oh, Musa utters, gaining everyone's attention as they turn to her. We've got other problems, the music fairy says, looking at the hill as everyone turns to where she was looking and sees the Yeti monster, the same one they faced hours ago, standing on top of the hill, glaring at them, and it wasn't alone. There were ice monsters with it, in large numbers. Looks like Furball's back, and he's brought some backup. Bloom says. Oh, that's just perfect. I've been itching for a rematch against Fuzzy Lumpkins for nearly icing me and Bloom. Naruto says, glaring at the monster that nearly killed him and Bloom. Stella looks back at Bloom. Bloom, stay back, we'll handle this, Stella says, and Bloom doesn't have to argue as she nods. Sure, Bloom says as she retreats to the entrance to the castle for safety. After seeing Bloom was safe, Naruto drew his sword and spun it as the blade caught ablaze while he looked at the others. Ready for round 2? Naruto asks, grinning as Stella turns to him and she grins as well. Hell yeah, you girls ready? Stella asks with Musa, Flora, and Tekna nodding, showing they were ready. Yeah, magic winks, the three yell, before they disappear in a bright flash. Not long after, the flash dissipated and they stood in their fairy forms, but like Stella, they instantly started to shiver. Oh, that's cold, the three shout, quickly wrapping their arms around themselves for warmth. Stella, seeing this, rubbed the back of her neck as she knew how they were feeling at the moment. Yeah, I should have warned you about the cold. Quick, use the change spell to change into warmer clothes, since we're about to get company. Stella suggested, with the three rapidly nodding. Right. The three yell before taking their arms off their bodies to do the hand gestures of the spell. Change. They yell before disappearing in another flash of light. Once the flash of light dissipated, they were now standing in their new winter outfits. Most of Musa's outfit was the same, but there were clear additions to her outfit. She had a light rose-colored long-sleeve undershirt under her strap top. She now had light rose-colored wrist-length fingerless gloves that extended from above her forearms to her wrists, while there was white fur at the base of the forearms, and the purple ribbons around her forearms had white fur at the ends. The hems of the strap top and mini skirt had white fur, as she also had light rose-colored long thighs which covered her legs. Her boots had white fur at the top of, and finally, her purple headphones had changed into winter ear muffs. For Flora, like Musa, her outfit was mostly the same but with additions and changes. Her previously light pink wrist-length fingerless gloves were now fingered gloves off the same length with white fur at the top of the gloves. She now had on a light pink-colored long-sleeve undershirt under her corset dress, while at the hem of the dress, there was white fur. At the top of her boots. Tekna's outfit, originally different than the rest of the girls, was still different. While she retained her sparkling lavender-colored full-body suit, her sleeves had changed. Her sleeves were now light lavender-colored and covered her whole arms and hands with white fur at her wrists and around the collar of her suit. There was white fur on her waist, mimicking a mini skirt of sorts. Her powder blue knee-high high-heeled boots had white fur at the top, right at her knees. And her lavender helmet also had white fur on the base of it. If you want to know what Flora's, Musa's and Tekna's outfits look like, just search Lena Lee 772 and Winter and you'll find them in the search. Once the girls' outfits had finished changing and they felt warm again, they glared at the charging ice army. Ready to take them on in battle. Insert Ost, Find Your Flame Night Battle Theme by Sega, Tomoya Otani featuring Tyler Smith and Kellen Quinn from Sonic Frontiers, Stillness Motion. Let's get rid of these ice shackles, Musa says as she gathers her magic for a bit before she releases the gathered magic as gathered magic releases in one massive burst in a sonic boom, hitting the ice monsters and shattering them. Seeing this, the others follow up their attacks. Flora flies up to a group of ice monsters as she lifts her hand and some of her magic forms in her palm. She looks down at the ice monsters and smiles. Flowers of the wind, she says before she blows at her hand, causing a bunch of magical particles to fall at the ice monsters before sinking into the ground. Nothing happens at first when suddenly, thick green vine roots sprout from the ground at the feet of the ice monsters, and the roots start grabbing them and hoisting them in the air. The ice monsters were held helplessly in the air before they were thrown to the ground by the roots, shattering on impact. Stella was seen in the air, seeing a bunch of ice monsters rushing towards the castle. Seeing this, she decides to put an end to this. She spins her scepter before she deceases down at them as she slams the bottom of her scepter into the ground. Heat flash. Stella yells as a bright pulse of magic erupts from her scepter and a wave of magic goes off from her and travels towards the group of ice monsters she had targeted as the wave of magic hits the monsters and they instantly melt from the heat. Naruto was charging at a large group of ice monsters. Lifting his katana for a slash, he leaps into the air, soaring high above the ice monsters as the blade was still ablaze but the flames were brighter than before. Flame Wind Art Elemental Combo, Flaming Saw Lock. Naruto yells before he swings at the monsters and a flaming sawblade-like attack forms, soaring to the monsters. The ice monsters saw the incoming attack and started shooting ice spikes at the sawblade but all of the spikes melted before even reaching the attack due to the heat as the attack cuts through all of the monsters, leaving them in two halves before they shattered. Naruto lands on the ground and turns back to the shattered monsters as he grins but his grin falls when he sees more monsters being formed from the ground. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," he mutters, not believing what he is seeing. The ice monsters see him and start charging toward him. Reacting quickly, Naruto flicks his katana, cutting off the flames as the wind engraving and he starts spinning before. Wind Art, Razor's Edge. He yells and an explosion goes off where he was. We look back at the girls as we see they had regrouped and were busy taking out any ice monster they could see but they started noticing that each time they took out some of the monsters, more would form and attack them. It's like whenever we take out a few, more show up. Stella says as she fires a beam of light magic at an ice monster, destroying it. Tecna sees a large group charging at them and she summons her glider to float in the air. "I'll take care of these ones," Tecna says as she flies over to the group of ice monsters. While she flies, her hands start to glow and magic constructs in the form of computer chips form in her hands. She drops the constructs on the heads of the monsters as they start to beep. Once she finishes flying, Tecna hovers above the monsters and raises her right hand, with her middle finger and thumb pressed together. "Digi-bombs," she yells before snapping her fingers and the bombs go off and destroy the ice monsters. "Now that's what I call a clean wipe. Why are there so many?" Musa yells as she fires a sonic boom at some monsters who are shooting ice spikes at them. As a bunch of more ice monsters appear in front of them and are about to fire spikes at them, a wind attack cuts through them, causing the monsters to momentarily freeze in place before dropping to the ground in two pieces as Naruto leaps through the air and lands next to the girls, with snow on some places of his body, and yes, the pun was intended. It's the ice and snow around us, it's making them even after we take them out. An endless source, Naruto says as he cuts one of the monsters that jumps at him. He looks around and sees the castle behind them and he realizes something. We need to take better cover. The castle's the best place for that, there's no ice or snow, meaning we can take them out in there without the change of them regenerating. He says. The girls hear him and realize he is telling the truth. Right. The girls yell before they take off running towards the castle. The ice monsters give chase. The teens manage to make it to the castle as they quickly close the gates before the ice monsters can enter the courtyard, but even with the gate being closed, it doesn't stop the ice monsters. Some start to climb the castle's outer walls, using their spiked appendages to stab into the wall and ascend it. The teens locked the gate upon closing it when they started hearing commotion from outside and they realized that the monsters were trying to enter the castle. And they knew they had to stop these monsters before they entered the castle. "Stella, let's go and stop them from coming in," Musa says as she summons a flute. Stella nods and the two fly up just above the wall and they see most of the ice monsters were gathered up at the gate, firing ice spikes in an attempt to break it down while some were climbing the wall. Musa lifted her flute to her mouth and she started to play it as a magic shield around the castle that prevented any more monsters from coming to the castle but that meant the ones that were already there were trapped. Stella aims her scepter at the monsters climbing the walls and starts firing magic blasts at them, shattering them. Isn't there a saying that goes, "The best defense is the best offense"? Stella asks as she continues to destroy the ice monsters climbing the wall but she misses a couple as some reach the top of the wall and jumps down to the courtyard as they were plummeting down to Bloom. Bloom sees the ice monsters falling towards her and she panics, as she can't defend herself. Just as the ice monsters were about to land on her, a beam of green, digitized magic and an arc of fire soared above Bloom and struck the monsters, destroying them in an explosion. Bloom closes her eyes from the explosion before she looks to see Tecna with her hands aimed at her while Naruto was standing next to her, with sword ablaze. "Thanks, Naruto and Tecna," Bloom says as the two smile. "No problem, Bloom," Naruto says flicking his sword, extinguishing the flames on his sword. "Yeah, no need to waste your energy on these guys, you are a princess," Tecna says. Flora flies up to the wall to see Stella and Musa were still busy destroying the monsters casting the shield. She lands on the top of the wall and looks down to see some Stella couldn't take out were still climbing up the wall and were nearing the top. "There's more coming," Stella yells and Flora frowns. "We can't give up," Flora says as she places her hands on the ledge of the wall and closes her eyes to concentrate. Her magic starts to form at her palms as Flora starts to groan, focusing more of her magic into her spell due to the lack of natural life in the area, but she manages to conjure thick vines that sprout from the wall and these roots, that should keep them busy for a while. "There's too many for us to take on, and they're hitting the gate. I don't know how much longer the gate can hold," Stella says, firing more light blasts at the ice monsters. Musa stops playing her flute. "I could go up to the top of the castle and put a sonic curtain on it to defend it," Musa suggests, but Stella shakes her head at that. "No Musa, that's too risky," Stella says. When the two were about to try something else, the Yeti monster appeared in front of them, causing the two to look up at them with shocked expressions. "Oh shit, the big guy's here," the Solarian princess yells as the Yeti monster roars and blasts a frost attack at the two fairies. This attack causes their wings to momentarily freeze as they plummet down to the courtyard where they unintentionally collide into Bloom, taking her down with them. The others see this and rush to the fallen trio. "You guys alright? Anything broke?" Naruto asks, helping the three up to their feet. "No, we're good," Bloom says, groaning a little as she stands up. "That's good." Naola, whatever Naruto was about to say was interrupted when they suddenly felt a breeze hit them as Flora and Tecna came flying at them and crashed onto the floor beside them. "Flora, Tecna," the four yelled before rushing over to their fallen friends and starting to check on them. "Are you guys alright?" Naruto asks. "Yeah, we're fine." Tecna lets out a groan as she and Flora sit up. All of the teens look up at the wall and see the Yeti monster rip off Flora's roots and freeze them. "That thing's too strong," the tech-savvy fairy says. The teens then hear the gate start to get banged against as they look to see it was starting to freeze with cracks beginning to form on the gate. The teens quickly realize that the castle is about to be infiltrated. "Oh, shit," Naruto mutters as they see more cracks forming on the gate. "We need to head back into the castle, now," he yells. The others listen and all of them start heading back into the castle just moments before the gate finally gives and the ice monsters start entering the courtyard in search of their prey. Upon seeing the winx were not in the courtyard, the ice monsters rush into the castle after them. Running through the corridors of the castle, the ice monsters were searching for the teens, not noticing Musa was hovering above them, with her arms spread open as magic was forming in her hands. Mega Boom Blast. Musa yells, sending her spell down at the ice monsters as it goes to the walls next to the monsters where magic constructs of subwoofers form. The ice monsters didn't know what was going on as Musa snapped her fingers and the subwoofers started blasting deep bass, utterly shattering the ice monsters into frost. Seeing her spell take care of the monsters, Musa floats down to the ground and lands on her feet as she smirks. She then goes to a corner where everyone else is waiting for her. Took out some of those monsters that were following us. Nice job, Musa, Flora says. So, what do we do now? Stella asks. Before anyone could suggest an idea, they felt the castle begin to violently shake, with debris falling off from the ceiling and cracks appearing on the walls. What was that? Bloom asks after the shaking subsides. The teens then hear a roar from the outside and Tekna realizes something. That ugly son of a, that Yeti's trying to smash the castle down, in an attempt to kill us. Tekna says, alerting everyone about this as the building again violently shakes. What are we going to do? Stella asks. Naruto felt the shaking subside once again and realized that they only had about a few minutes before the building eventually collapsed and they'd get crushed under the debris if they didn't escape in time. We get the hell out of here and fight the ugly bastard before he destroys the castle and kills us. Naruto says as he rolls his sleeve and activates his ruined seal before he pulls out the black dagger he took from the treasure room. He turns to Bloom as he presents the dagger to her. Bloom, here, he says. Bloom looks at the dagger with a raised eyebrow. What's this? Bloom asks. Something to defend you against these monsters. You might need it just in case some come running to attack you. Naruto says. Bloom looks at him for a bit before she looks back at the dagger and she takes it. Okay, Bloom says as she inspects it before she holds it close to her body. Come on guys, time is not on our side here. Naruto says. Right, the girls yell before all of them start running through the corridors. Along the way, the teens came across a bunch of the ice monsters but they were able to take them out with ease. However, they heard some commotion coming from outside the castle as the Yeti let out a roar. What was that? Flora asks, after hearing the roar. I have no idea and I don't want to know about it. Naruto yells as they continue to run down a corridor until he spots something coming up. Come on, he yells, picking up his pace as they enter a large space in the center of the castle. Upon entering the center of the castle, the teens look back and see a large group of ice monsters behind them, approaching fast. Reacting to the oncoming danger, Flora fires a ball of nature at the floor by the corridor as vines appear and close the way out of the corridor to at least buy them some time to come up with a plan, but this was short-lived as upon reached the vine blockage, the ice monster began chewing at the vines, cutting through them as the teens see this. This doesn't look good, Flora says, seeing her plan fail. The vines finally give away and the ice monster enter the area as they start surrounding the teens in all directions. This really doesn't look good, Musa says, seeing they were surrounded. Grouping back together, the winx were looking around. Get away from my friends. Flora yells as she fires a barrage of magic blasts at the ice monsters' feet. What seemed like she had missed, was all intentional as Venus-like fly trap-like plants sprouted from the floor under the ice monsters, and in one swift motion, the plants opened and chomped the monsters before shrinking back into the floor. Tekna summons a digitized sphere and uses it to capture some of the monsters below, catching some before she lifts the sphere and sends it towards Musa, who has a ball of magic already forming in her hand as she throws it at the sphere. The ball of magic collides with the sphere, causing the sphere to explode, destroying the ice monsters along with the sphere. Meanwhile, Stella was firing beams of magic at the monsters while below. Naruto was under her, rushing at a bunch of ice monsters as he let his sword cut through the air before he lifted it near to his other hand and flicked it, allowing the black steel to shake and vibrate while the earth engraving started to glow. As he was about to reach the ice monsters, he leapt into the air, jumped over the monsters, and lifted his sword above his head. Earth Art, Quake Blast. Naruto yells as he lands in the middle of the monsters while stabbing his sword into the ground, resulting in a large outward blast of kinetic energy to be released which sends the ice monsters flying in different directions before shattering from the force. Bloom was busy, using the dagger Naruto gave her to cut through any monster that tried to attack her. While she was busy dealing with one, she was paying attention to the one that's stalking right behind her. It waited for a bit before it made its move by leaping at her. Flora was the first to see this as her eyes widen. Bloom, watch out! Flora shouts, alerting everyone who turn to see what is going on and sees Bloom is about to be attacked. Everyone started to move to intercept the monster, but it would be too late by the time they reached Bloom. However, they didn't need to as something sliced the monster into two halves, destroying it as Bloom, who had her eyes closed when she saw she was about to get attacked, realized she wasn't being killed by the monsters. She opens her eyes and sees someone in front of her she wasn't expecting. "Wah, brah no, Prince Sky?" Bloom asks, seeing the blonde specialist standing in front of her with his weapons drawn. She was surprised to see him here, especially since the last time they seen each other was at the exhibition nearly 2 weeks ago. Suddenly, the skylight above them breaks as 2 people burst through it and land next to Sky, and these 2 people were also 2 people Bloom wasn't expecting to see. Timmy, Brandon. It was true. Sky's teammates, Timmy and Brandon, were also there, with their weapons drawn. "What are you guys doing here?" Naruto asks, wondering how they got here and why were they even here. Or how did they know they were here? Sky looks back at the winx with a serious expression. "No time to explain. We've got other things to worry about," Sky says before he looks back in front of him to glare at the ice monsters in front of him. "Come on guys, let's take care of these icicles down," he yells before rushing forward toward the ice monsters as he slashes at them, cutting through them and destroying them. Timmy and Brandon follow Sky's lead as Timmy fires pulse arrows from his blaster at some of the ice monsters, taking them out while Brandon was showing off his swordsman skills as he cuts through a large ice monster with ease. Not wanting to feel left out or outdone, Naruto starts attacking any ice monster in his sight, performing highly skilled moves with his katana, and the girls follow working together to take out any ice monsters in their sight. It didn't take long before there was a small bunch of the ice monsters remaining and all of the 9 teens were confident they could take them out. However, the castle began to shake as everyone saw a shadow casting over the area and they look up at the skylight to see the Yeti monster was looking down at them through the skylight. "Great, not him again." Stella groans, not happy to see this monster back. The Yeti monster roars as it smashes its fist down through the skylight, and into the center of the castle, trying to kill everyone there, but fortunately, everyone was able to evade the large fist. Seeing the fist, the specialists start attacking it, firing pulse arrows and slashing at it with their swords, causing the monster to roar out in pain as it retracts its hand from the castle to see it had lacerations. Seeing the monster was momentarily distracted, Stella decided now was the time to strike against it. "Okay, that does it," Stella says before she looks at the other girls. "Come on girls, it's take of this bastard once and for all," she says, and the others couldn't help but agree as they fly through the destroyed skylight to face the Yeti monster. When the girls exited the castle and were now face to face with the Yeti, they didn't hold back as they began their assault at it, hitting it with everything they had, but the monster was tanking most of their attacks as it tried to swat at them, attempting to hit them. Naruto and Bloom with the specialists were making their way to the top of the roof as they were watching the action unfold and saw the girls were struggling with the Yeti. "That thing is too strong. It's like the only thing that could hurt this thing is a big attack," Naruto says while running up a stairway. What he wasn't aware of was that Bloom had heard him and realized something as her eyes widened. "Wait, that's it," Bloom yells before coming to a stop. The others see her stop and turn back to her to see she was looking up to the sky, staring at Tekna, who was firing an energy blast at the Yeti. "Tekna, you have to coordinate the attack. Converge all your magic into one big spell and trap him," she yells, drawing Tekna's attention as the tech-savvy fairy hears her and realizes her plan. "Of course, why didn't I think of it sooner?" Tekna yells, feeling like kicking herself for not realizing it sooner, but that'd have to wait. She looks at the others in the air. "Girls, we have to work together to defeat this monster. We corner him and then finish him off," she yells, drawing in the other girls' attention as they listen and nod, getting ready to do the plan. The Yeti sees them not attacking and takes this moment to do an attack of its own by trying to smash them into the ground with its hands. It brings its hands down at the fairies, but the fairies are able to evade the attack by flying away as the Yeti slams its hands onto the ground, causing an earthquake to go off. While this was happening, the fairies took their positions around the Yeti so they could commence their plan. Tekna was the first to do something as she fired a blast of magic at the Yeti as it grew and spread around the Yeti and a dome-like sphere appeared around it, status sphere. She yells. Flora follows up by holding her hand up close to her lips and blows at her palm, in a blowing kiss-like motion as green magical particles fly toward the trapped Yeti monster. The magical particles surround the sphere as they turn into seeds. Stella flies up to the top of the sphere. She lifts her scepter above her head as she hovers over the sphere. Solarian flash. Stella yells as her scepter releases a flash of light at the sphere. The light causes Flora's seeds to grow and sprout open, with flowers growing onto the sphere as the flowers shoot out vines at the Yeti and tie it up. Seeing the Yeti was tied up, Musa floats at the sphere and raises her hands at it as her magic gathers at them. Sonic Combo Blast. Musa yells as she fires a massive sonic blast at the Yeti. Her attack collides with the sphere and this causes it to explode, with the Yeti being sent flying through the air. While this was happening, Naruto, Bloom, and the specialists made it to the top of the castle as they saw the Yeti flying backward in the air. Realizing that they were close to beating it, Naruto steps forward, with his sword drawn to deliver the finishing blow. And just to make sure you're down for good, Naruto says as two engravings on the sword begin to glow. Wind and water as the wind picks up around him. He spins the blade before he swings it at the Yeti. Wind-water art elemental combo, flash freeze. His attack soars through the air before it hits the Yeti and a loud freezing sound goes off as the Yeti gets completely frozen in a chunk of ice from Naruto's attack. The Yeti falls to the ground as snow is thrown in the air from the force of the landing. The fairies fly over to where the Yeti landed as the snow clears away and they see the frozen Yeti lying in a massive crater before hearing a loud crack. They look at the Yeti and see the ice was cracking in various areas until the ice shatters and the Yeti disappears. The teens see this and were silent for a bit before they start cheering, feeling relieved that the Yeti was defeated. End Ost. After all that chaos and action, the teens regrouped outside of the castle as they were standing by the ship the specialist trio arrived in after the girls transformed back to normal. Naruto steps forward and holds out his fist at the trio. "Dudes, I'm so glad you're here. You saved our butts there," Naruto says while smiling as Stella nods, agreeing with him. "Yeah, you guys really helped us out," Stella says while the other girls nod, showing their thanks to the trio. Brandon, being the one closest to Naruto, fist bumps the blonde as he smiles. "Ah, it was no big deal. We had to," Brandon says. "But, how did you know we were here on Domino?" Only some of the staff at Elfie knew about this mission. Tekna asks a question that had been on her mind for some time since they appeared. The reason for that is because Red Fountain has fallen at the hands of the Tricks. Timmy answers that as the Winx's eyes widen at hearing about Red Fountain. Red Fountain fell, Flora utters and the specialists nod, closing their eyes. "Yeah, and all the specialists and staff have taken refuge at Elfie." Brandon explains as Sky takes over. "Once we arrived at Elfie, Headmistress Farragonda pulled us aside and informed us about your mission and requested us to come and escort you back to Magix. Professor Paladuum opened a portal to Domino so we could get here faster, but we were on the other side of the planet. We were flying all night but we didn't give up on finding you guys and fortunately, we did." Sky says. "Well, thank you for coming to get us," Naruto says as "Like we said, we had to but we still would have done it regardless." Timmy says and his friends nod along, agreeing with him. "Hey, how about us going back to Alfie Sound?" Flora asks as Stella happily agrees wholeheartedly. "Sounds like a great idea, winter weather is just so bad for my skin," Stella says, rubbing her hand on her face and everyone laughs. Well, almost everyone. Bloom was the only one who wasn't laughing as she had a sad expression while glancing at the castle. What she didn't see was that someone had seen her glance at the castle and seen her expression as they frowned, worried. Insert music, Swimming by Flawed Mangoes. Once everything had settled, the 19s entered the ship and took off into the air as they prepared to go off-world. Inside the side, we see Timmy and Brandon at the controls while Sky was at the navigation. Musa, Tekna, and Flora were sitting next to each other as Flora was fast asleep with her head resting on Musa's shoulder while the musical fairy was playing a melody from her flute. Tekna was busy looking at the data on Domino she had collected during their mission from her data pad. Stella was sitting alone in front of the three, also fast asleep. In the far back, Bloom was sitting alone by the window, staring down below at Domino as she had a sad expression. "Bloom, are you alright?" Bloom hears someone asking her and she turns her head to see Naruto standing in front of her with a worried expression. "Yeah, I'm fine. Why do you ask?" Bloom asks as she flashes a small smile at Naruto. However, Naruto's expression remains unchanged as he looks at her. I saw you glance back at the castle and you had a sad look when you did. You sure you're okay? Naruto asks. This takes Bloom aback as she didn't know he was looking at her back there. She loses her smile and sighs before turning her head back to the window and looking at the frozen wasteland that was Domino. No, I'm not. This is my kingdom, and to see like this, now knowing what happened here, I feel like I'm abandoning Domino in its time for need, where it needs its princess, Bloom says. Bloom, you're not abandoning Domino. You're just going to get the power needed to save it, the dragon flame. Once you get it back, well, come back to Domino and find a way to restore it to its former glory, and then look for your parents. And I know that somewhere out there in the magic dimension, they're there, for you to find them and reunite with. Naruto says. Thank you for telling me that, Naruto. Bloom says as she starts to fidget in her seat. And, thank you for what you said back at the dining hall. I don't know what I would have done if you weren't there with me. She says, shyly, and Naruto just flashes a fox-like grin and waves his hand at her. Ah, it was no biggie. It was the least I could do for you. You and the girls have been there for me, so I had to help you. Naruto says, and Bloom couldn't help but smile at his thoughtfulness. She remembers something and she reaches for something in her coat pocket. Oh, you might want this back. Bloom says as she pulls out the dagger Naruto had given to her and presents it to him. Naruto looks at the dagger for a bit before he looks at Bloom and gently grabs her hand as he pushes it back to her, surprising her. Nah, you keep it for now. Who knows if you'll need it. Naruto says as he drops his grin and smiles at Bloom. Just give it back to me when this is all over. Deal, he says as he raises his fist at Bloom. Bloom looks at the fist before she grins and raises her fist to Naruto's and bumps them together. Deal, Bloom says as they smile and sit together, letting all the events of Domino fill their mind before they fall fast asleep. Our hero's mission is complete, and now, they might have a lead in reclaiming the dragon flame and defeating the tricks once and for all. End Ost.